Why did 8 hardened cowboys go silent the moment Big Ben Cole's new bride set one battered skillet on the table? The cornbread cracked beneath Rachel's knife as steam curled into the lamplight. 8 hungry ranch hands stared while Big Ben stood frozen in the doorway. Then one cowboy reached for a second piece, and something happened at that lonely table Rachel never expected. "Stay with us." The stagecoach rolled into Silver Creek just before 4 in the afternoon, its wheels grinding over a road hardened by the first cold spell of November. Rachel Bennett had been awake for most of the last 12 miles. She sat near the window with both gloved hands folded over the handle of a covered food basket, watching Montana Territory open around her in long brown slopes, dark pine stands, and distant mountains already carrying snow along their upper ridges. The sky looked heavier here than it had farther east. Lower, somehow. Gray clouds gathered over the peaks, and every few minutes a gust struck the coach hard enough to make the leather curtains snap. The driver shouted to the horses. Silver Creek appeared below them. Calling it a town seemed generous. A church steeple rose above perhaps 24 buildings. A blacksmith's chimney smoked beside a long stable. Across the muddy main road stood a mercantile with sacks of grain stacked beneath its awning, a barber shop, a saloon with 2 horses tied outside, and a narrow hotel with a crooked sign swinging above the porch. Rachel pressed one thumb against the woven handle of her basket. Somewhere down there was Benjamin Cole. Her husband by tomorrow, if neither of them changed their minds. The thought still felt strange. 3 months earlier, she had been helping prepare breakfast in a boarding house kitchen in Iowa when her aunt placed a newspaper beside the flour bin. The marriage notice had been short. Montana cattle rancher, 36, own property. Seeking practical woman of sound character accustomed to household work and rural life. Marriage intended. Serious replies only. No poetry. No claims of loneliness. No talk about wanting a pretty bride with delicate hands. Rachel had almost laughed. Instead, she had written. Now the stage turned onto Silver Creek's main road and slowed before the depot. Men looked up from the hitching rail. A woman carrying a parcel stopped beneath the mercantile awning. Rachel felt their attention before the coach even stopped. She knew that feeling. She had known it since she was 15. First came the eyes, then the quick calculation. Broad shoulders, full waist, heavy hips, round face. After that came whatever judgment the observer preferred. Sometimes pity, sometimes amusement, sometimes the expression that irritated her most. The little flash of surprise that suggested a woman built like Rachel had somehow appeared where women like her were not expected to appear. She had learned not to help people with their conclusions. The coach rocked once and stopped. "Silver Creek," the driver called. Rachel waited while an elderly man climbed down first. Then a young mother passed out a sleeping child to her husband. Rachel set the food basket on the seat, adjusted the brown wool coat over her dress, and reached for the doorframe. Cold air struck her immediately. It smelled of horses, wood smoke, damp earth, and pine. She stepped down carefully. Her boot found the iron step. Then the road. When she straightened, she saw him. There was no possibility of mistaking Benjamin Cole. He stood near the depot fence beside a dark bay gelding, towering over every man within 20 feet of him. 6'7", the letter had said. On paper, it had sounded almost ridiculous. In person, he looked as if someone had built a cowboy at the wrong scale. His shoulders stretched a heavy canvas coat nearly flat across the back. His boots were worn pale at the toes. A dark hat shadowed a face made rough by wind and high country sun, with a straight nose, a square jaw, and brown hair visible beneath the brim. He wasn't young-looking, not old either, just weathered. Rachel noticed his hands next, large enough to make the leather reins look narrow. Then he looked directly at her. For half a second, Benjamin Cole did nothing. It was barely a pause. Most people would not have noticed. Rachel did. She always noticed. His eyes moved over her once, not crudely, but fully enough. His mouth tightened. Something behind his expression shifted. There it was. Rachel felt the old wall rise inside her almost automatically. She had traveled too far to stand on a muddy Montana road and watch another man rearrange disappointment into politeness. She turned back toward the coach. "My trunk is the blue one," she told the driver. The driver nodded toward the luggage strapped behind. Benjamin finally moved. He crossed the road in long strides. "Miss Bennett?" Rachel faced him. "Yes." Up close, he was even larger. She had to tip her chin to meet his eyes. "Benjamin Cole," I assumed. Something flickered at the corner of his mouth, then disappeared. Behind them, the stage driver started loosening luggage straps. Benjamin looked at Rachel again. That hesitation returned. Rachel spared him the trouble. "If you've changed your mind, Mr. Cole, I'd rather hear it before that trunk comes down." The driver's hands stopped moving. Across the road, someone entered the mercantile a little too slowly. Benjamin stared at her. "Changed my mind?" "About the arrangement?" "No." "You hesitated." He drew a breath through his nose. Rachel waited. She expected one of the usual explanations. "You're not what I pictured." The description was incomplete. I didn't mean offense. Instead, Benjamin removed his hat. The gesture changed him. Without it, he seemed less like the figure people probably pointed out from across saloons, and more like a tired man who had ridden into town knowing he might make a mistake and had just discovered he'd already made one. "You're right," he said. Rachel hadn't expected that. He glanced toward the depot, then back at her. "The letter your aunt sent described you as practical, hard-working, good with household accounts, experienced with cooking and preserving." "All true." "I expect so." His large hand tightened once around the brim of his hat. "But that's nearly everything I know about you." Rachel said nothing. Benjamin's jaw shifted. "I stood here just now realizing I agreed to marry a woman while knowing more about what she can do than who she is." A wagon rattled somewhere behind them. The blacksmith's hammer rang twice from down the street. Rachel studied him. He continued before she could answer. "That isn't your embarrassment to carry." There was no softness in his voice, no practiced charm. He sounded like a man admitting he'd measured a fence wrong. Plainly, because the measurement was wrong. Rachel looked away toward the mountains. "You expected someone different. I expected a description." She turned back. Benjamin held her gaze. "That's the problem." For several seconds, neither spoke. Rachel had spent the journey preparing herself for rejection. She had prepared for coldness. She had even prepared for kindness offered out of obligation. She had not prepared for a man who seemed irritated with himself. The driver dropped her trunk to the ground with a heavy thump. Benjamin replaced his hat. "Is that everything?" "The trunk and basket." He walked toward the trunk. Rachel followed. "It's heavy, so am I." The words escaped before she decided whether to say them. Benjamin stopped. Rachel immediately regretted it. There were some habits pride developed after enough years of needing protection. Strike first. Laugh first. Say the ugly thing yourself before anyone else could use it. Benjamin looked at her. His face didn't change. Then he bent, gripped the trunk by both handles, and lifted it as if it contained blankets instead of nearly everything Rachel owned. "I meant the trunk," he said. Rachel stood still. He carried it toward the wagon waiting beside the depot. Not a carriage. A working ranch wagon with mud dried around the wheel rims, a folded canvas tarp in back, 2 feed sacks tucked beneath the bench, and a Winchester secured in a leather boot near the driver's side. The sight of it eased something in Rachel. At least he had not come pretending ranch life was prettier than it was. Benjamin secured the trunk behind the seat, then returned for the basket. Rachel kept hold of it. "I'll carry this." He nodded. No argument. That helped too. Across the street, 2 cowboys were watching openly now. Benjamin noticed. One of them looked away. The other didn't. Benjamin said nothing, but whatever was in his stare made the second man suddenly find the saloon doors interesting. Rachel almost smiled. Almost. "Have you eaten?" Benjamin asked. "At noon. There's a diner beside the hotel. I'm not hungry." "You will be before supper." "I've survived hunger before." His brow moved slightly. "I wasn't questioning your survival." There was that strange plainness again. Rachel tightened her grip on the basket. "No," she said after a moment. "I suppose you weren't." Benjamin nodded toward the hotel. "I reserved you a room for tonight." Her head came up. "Tonight? The preacher won't marry us until morning." Rachel had known the ceremony was planned for the next day, but some part of her had expected Benjamin to take her directly to wherever he was staying. He seemed to understand the question she hadn't asked. "My room is at the other end of the hall," he said. "Mrs. Carter runs the hotel. She'll see that you've got hot water." Rachel watched him carefully. "Thank you. Road to Black Ridge gets worse after snow. We should leave soon after the ceremony." "How far?" 4 hours in good weather. And bad? Depends how bad." The wind lifted loose strands of hair around Rachel's cheek. Benjamin looked toward the mountains. Snow clouds had thickened considerably since the stage came in. "Weather's turning." Rachel followed his gaze. The mountains looked almost blue beneath the gathering storm. Black Ridge was somewhere up there. A ranch she'd never seen. Men she'd never met. A house she might spend the rest of her life inside. And beside her stood the enormous stranger she had promised by letter to marry. She should have been frightened. Perhaps she was. But curiosity had begun pushing against the fear. Benjamin took a step toward the hotel, then stopped. "Miss Bennett." "Yes?" He looked uncomfortable again, though in a different way. "If you want the morning stage east, I'll pay the fare." Rachel's fingers tightened around the basket. He continued. "No argument, no offense taken. You came a long way based on a handful of letters. You have a right to decide after meeting me whether those letters were enough." A bitter little laugh almost rose in her throat. "You think I'm going to run because you're tall?" This time the corner of his mouth actually moved. "No." "Because you don't talk much?" "I've been told that's an improvement." Rachel did smile then. It surprised both of them. Benjamin's eyes changed when he saw it. Only slightly. But Rachel caught that too. She looked toward the hotel, then toward the stagecoach, where the driver was climbing back onto his seat. The route east was still open, for another few minutes at least. She could call out, take the offer, return to the life she already understood. Instead, she looked up at Benjamin Cole. "No," she said. His expression settled. "No. I didn't travel this far to decide what kind of man you are in 5 minutes." The stage driver cracked the reins. The coach began rolling away. Rachel watched it pass. She did not wave. When the sound of its wheels faded down the road, Benjamin shifted beside her. "Fair enough." Rachel looked at him. "You're going to say that often, aren't you?" Probably. He reached for the hotel door and held it open. Rachel stepped toward it, then paused beside him. For one moment they stood close enough that she could smell cold air and leather on his coat. She looked up. "Mr. Cole." "Yes?" "I haven't decided I like you." His eyes stayed on hers. "I haven't asked you to." Rachel went inside. Behind her, after a brief pause, Benjamin followed. And for the first time since she had stepped from the stage, Rachel realized the thing unsettling her most about Big Ben Cole was not his height, his silence, or the lonely ranch waiting somewhere beyond the snowy mountains. It was the possibility that the man might actually mean what he said. Mrs. Carter's hotel room was narrow, clean, and warmer than Rachel expected. A small iron stove ticked in the corner. A washstand held a white pitcher with a blue rim, and someone had folded 2 towels beside it, with enough care to make Rachel stop and look at them. Her trunk sat at the foot of the bed. The food basket rested on the chair. Outside, Silver Creek settled into evening. Boots crossed the boardwalk below. A wagon rattled past. Somewhere down the street, piano music leaked from the saloon, thin and uneven through the wind. Rachel stood at the window and watched snow begin to dust the road. Not enough to stay. Enough to warn. Across the street, Benjamin was tying a canvas cover over the wagon bed. Even from the second floor, she could pick him out immediately. He worked without hurry, testing each knot, checking the harness leather, lifting one wheel slightly with his shoulder while he inspected the rim. A man from the stable came over and said something. Benjamin answered. The man laughed. Benjamin did not. But he did tip his head. Rachel drew the curtain. She had expected the night before her wedding to feel different. There should have been nerves, maybe regret, maybe some great trembling sense that her old life was ending. Instead, she felt tired. Travel had settled into her bones. She sat on the bed and opened the top drawer of her trunk. There was her good dress, brown wool, plain collar, small pearl buttons. Her aunt had repaired the hem twice before Rachel left and pressed it beneath a stack of folded linens so it would not wrinkle too badly. Rachel held it up. Tomorrow she would marry a man she had known in person less than a day. She set the dress across the chair. Then she laughed once under her breath. "Well," she told the empty room, "you always did have a talent for making sensible decisions." A knock came at the door. Rachel straightened. "Yes?" "Mrs. Carter." Rachel opened it. The hotel keeper stood outside holding a tray with beef stew, bread, and a cup of coffee. "Mr. Cole said you hadn't eaten since noon." Rachel looked at the tray. "He said that?" "He paid for supper." "I can pay for my own supper." Mrs. Carter gave her a knowing look. "Then argue with him in the morning. Stew's getting cold." Rachel took the tray. "Thank you." Mrs. Carter hesitated before leaving. "He's a decent man." Rachel said nothing. The older woman continued. "Not an easy one, but decent. People keep telling me that. That usually means something." Rachel almost asked what. Instead, she shut the door. She ate by the window while the snow came down a little harder. The stew was too salty. The bread was good. The coffee was strong enough to leave an aftertaste. By 10, Silver Creek had gone quiet. Rachel slept badly. At dawn, someone rang the church bell once. The sound carried clean through the cold. Rachel woke before the second ring. She dressed slowly, pinned her hair, buttoned the brown wool dress, then stood in front of the small mirror above the washstand. Her own face looked back at her. Round cheeks, brown eyes, a mouth that had learned to hold back more than it said. Nothing had changed overnight. That helped. At 8:30, she went downstairs. Benjamin was waiting in the hotel parlor. He wore a black coat she had not seen the day before and a clean white shirt fastened high at the throat. His boots had been brushed. His hair was still damp from washing. For such a large man, he looked unexpectedly uncomfortable. Rachel stopped at the bottom of the stairs. Benjamin stood. His eyes moved to her face, then to the dress, then back to her face. He said nothing for 1 second too long. Rachel raised an eyebrow. He cleared his throat. "You look nice." It came out so stiffly that Rachel nearly smiled. "Thank you. I mean it. I assumed you did." His shoulders eased a fraction. Mrs. Carter appeared from the dining room carrying her apron full of spoons. "The preacher's waiting," she said. "And if you two stand there much longer, half the town will decide you're quarreling before the wedding." Benjamin picked up Rachel's coat. She reached for it. He held it open. Rachel paused, then turned and let him settle it over her shoulders. His hands did not touch her, not even accidentally. That restraint registered. They walked to the church side by side. Snow covered the roofs now, thin but even. The main road had gone white at the edges and brown in the middle where wagon wheels had cut through. Smoke drifted low from chimneys. 2 boys carried a bucket between them from the pump and stopped to stare as Benjamin passed. Rachel heard one whisper, "That's Big Ben's bride." Benjamin heard it too. He kept walking. The church stood at the north end of town. Simple pine boards, 6 narrow windows. A bell rope hung beside the door. Inside, the preacher was arranging papers on a small table. His name was Reverend Collins. He was perhaps 60, gray-haired, with red hands and spectacles that slid down his nose whenever he looked at a document. Mrs. Carter came as witness. So did the blacksmith, a broad man named Amos Reed, who shook Rachel's hand and told her he had repaired Benjamin's wagon axle 3 times and therefore considered himself qualified to witness any contract Benjamin entered. Rachel liked him immediately. The ceremony was short. Before it began, Reverend Collins asked whether they wanted a moment alone. Benjamin glanced at Rachel. "Yes," she said. The preacher nodded toward a small side room. It smelled faintly of lamp oil and old hymnals. There was 1 chair. Benjamin remained standing. Rachel folded her gloves in her hands. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Benjamin said, "Before we do this, I want something clear." Rachel looked up. "I can promise you shelter." She waited. "A share in household money that's yours to manage without asking me for every dollar." She said nothing. "I can promise I won't raise a hand to you. I won't embarrass you in town. I won't make decisions about your personal things without asking." His jaw tightened slightly. "And I'll treat you with respect." Rachel watched him carefully. "But," he said, "I can't stand in that church and tell you I love you. I don't." The words were plain. They should have stung. They did not. Rachel appreciated them more than she wanted to. "I don't love you either," she said. Benjamin nodded. "Good." That made her blink. He corrected himself. "I mean, that's honest." Rachel almost laughed. "Benjamin." "Yes?" "If we're going to marry, there's something I want clear too." "Say it." She looked at the door, then back at him. "I didn't come all this way to wear your name in Silver Creek and become hired help once we reach the ranch." His expression changed. Not anger. Attention. "I can cook," Rachel continued. "I can keep accounts. I can preserve food, sew, clean, and manage a household. I'll do my share because I know how to work." Benjamin did not interrupt. "But I won't be treated like a servant who happens to sleep under the same roof. I won't ask permission to sit at my own table. I won't be introduced as your wife and then ordered around like a girl you hired by the month." The room went very quiet. Snow tapped lightly against the window. Benjamin looked at her for a long time. Rachel had learned that men often disliked plain speech most when they demanded it from everyone else. She waited for him to show her what kind of man he was. Finally, he said, "Then don't." Rachel frowned. "Don't what?" "Don't ask permission to sit at your own table." His voice stayed low. "Don't behave like hired help." A pause. "If I treat you that way, tell me." Rachel studied him. "You'd listen?" "I'd better." "Why?" "Because you'd be my wife." There was no romance in the sentence. Something steadier lived beneath it. Rachel looked down at her folded gloves. "All right." Benjamin nodded. "All right." They returned to the chapel. Reverend Collins opened his book. The witnesses stood near the front pew. Benjamin and Rachel faced each other beneath a plain wooden cross. When the vows began, Rachel expected her hands to shake. They did not. Benjamin's voice stayed firm. So did hers. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the room seemed unchanged. No thunder, no music. Just the faint crackle of a small stove near the rear wall. Reverend Collins smiled. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Cole." Benjamin went still. Rachel nearly felt sorry for him. He looked at her as if the preacher had asked him to cross a frozen river without testing the ice. Rachel lifted her chin slightly. Benjamin leaned down. Very carefully, he pressed a brief kiss to her forehead. Not her mouth. Not her cheek, her forehead. Then he stepped back. Rachel looked at him. His ears had gone red. Amos Reed coughed into his fist. Mrs. Carter smiled openly. Outside, the snow was falling faster. Benjamin paid the preacher. Rachel signed the marriage record in careful script. Rachel Bennett. Then beneath it, for the first time, Rachel Cole. She stared at the name for one quiet second. Benjamin noticed. He said nothing. By 10:30, they were back at the hotel collecting her trunk. The road west had already begun to disappear beneath snow. Benjamin loaded the wagon and covered Rachel's trunk with canvas. Mrs. Carter packed them bread, boiled eggs, and 2 apples for the trip. "You'll want to move," she warned. "Clouds are closing over the ridge." Benjamin looked toward the mountains. "I know." Rachel climbed onto the wagon bench. Benjamin paused beside the wheel. "Still time to change your mind." She looked down at him. "You're asking again?" "Last time." Rachel glanced toward the hotel, toward the stage office, toward the road east, then west, where the mountains rose dark behind blowing snow. She shifted to make room on the bench. "You'd better climb up, husband." Benjamin looked at her for half a second. Then that almost smile appeared. He climbed beside her. The wagon rolled out of Silver Creek just before 11. Within 20 minutes, the town disappeared behind them. The road narrowed. Pines crowded closer. Snow clung to the wagon rails and melted against Rachel's gloves. Benjamin drove with both hands on the reins, shoulders bent slightly against the wind. For the first mile, neither spoke. Then Rachel noticed something. He had angled his body just enough to block the worst of the wind from hitting her side. He did not mention it. She did not thank him. But she noticed. Ahead, the road climbed into the mountains. Somewhere beyond those ridges waited Black Ridge Ranch, a house she had never seen. 8 cowboys she had never met. A life that existed only in letters until today. Rachel tucked her hands deeper into her coat. Beside her, Benjamin clicked softly to the horses. The giant cowboy had promised no love, only respect. For the moment, Rachel decided that might be enough to keep riding. The road to Black Ridge climbed steadily after Silver Creek disappeared behind the trees. For the first hour, the wagon followed a narrow track beside a creek crusted with ice along the edges. Pine branches leaned over the road, heavy with wet snow, and every so often Benjamin had to slow the horses, where wagon wheels had cut deep ruts into the frozen mud. Rachel said little. Neither did he. The silence was not uncomfortable exactly. It had weight, but not pressure. Twice Benjamin stopped to check the harness. The second time he reached beneath the wagon seat and handed Rachel a folded wool blanket without comment. She looked at it. "I'm not freezing." "No." "Then why are you giving me this?" "Because you will be." Rachel studied him for a moment, then took the blanket. "Thank you." He nodded and climbed back onto the seat. Another hour passed. The country changed as they rose higher. The open slopes gave way to thick timber, then broke suddenly into wide stretches of pale grass, where cattle stood with their backs to the wind. The mountains ahead looked close enough to touch, dark rock rising behind strips of white snow. Rachel had never seen anything so large. It made Silver Creek seem temporary. It made Iowa seem very far away. Near mid-afternoon, Benjamin pointed with one gloved hand. Black Ridge. At first, Rachel saw only a line of fence. Then the land opened. The ranch sat in a broad basin below the mountains, protected on three sides by timbered slopes. A long timber house stood near the center, built low and solid against the weather. Two barns sat behind it, one larger than the other. Farther off stood a bunkhouse, a smokehouse, a tool shed, and several corrals connected by rails silvered with age. Cattle moved slowly beyond the fences. Smoke rose from two chimneys. Nothing about the place was grand. Everything looked used. Rachel noticed that immediately. The gate leaned slightly on one hinge. One section of fencing near the road had been patched with fresh pine poles. A wagon tongue rested on blocks beside the barn. Near the pump stood a pile of split firewood stacked badly enough that the top half had begun to slide. Benjamin reined the horses toward the gate. A man emerged from the barn. He was broad through the chest, gray at the temples, and wore a sheepskin coat with one sleeve patched at the elbow. "That'll be George Mercer," Benjamin said. "The foreman?" "Yes." George came toward the wagon, wiped one hand on his trousers, and stopped. His eyes found Rachel. Then Benjamin. Then Rachel again. "You're back," Benjamin nodded. "So I am." George looked at Rachel's coat, her trunk under the canvas, the wedding band on her hand. His eyebrows went up. Benjamin said, "George Mercer, this is Rachel Cole." George blinked. Then he removed his hat. "Mrs. Cole." "Mr. Mercer." "George is fine." "Then Rachel is fine." Something in his face softened. "Fair enough." A younger man came running from behind the stable, nearly slipping in the mud. He looked about 18, red-haired, thin as a fence rail, with a feed scoop still in one hand. "Boss, Daniel says the bay mares—" He stopped. His mouth stayed open. Rachel waited. Benjamin looked at him. The boy snapped his mouth shut. "Charlie Webb," Benjamin said. Charlie pulled off his hat so fast he nearly dropped the feed scoop. "Ma'am." "Charlie." He looked at Benjamin, then at Rachel again. "You got married." Benjamin stared at him. Charlie swallowed. "Yes, sir." "I can see that now." Rachel turned her face away before either man noticed the smile. More hands appeared as Benjamin drove farther into the yard. A tall, black-haired man named Daniel Foster came from the horse barn carrying a rasp. Two others paused beside a wagon they were greasing. Another stepped from the bunkhouse with a tin cup in his hand. All of them looked. None of them said anything rude. That somehow made the staring more obvious. Benjamin climbed down. You boys planning to stand there until spring? Movement began immediately. George took the horses. Daniel reached for the trunk. Benjamin got there first. I've got it. Daniel glanced at Rachel, then at Benjamin. Yes, sir. Rachel carried her basket. She noticed the men watching Benjamin haul her trunk toward the house. Not mocking, surprised. Inside, the main house was warmer than the hotel, but much less welcoming. The front room had good furniture, heavy oak chairs, a long table, a stone fireplace, and shelves holding ledgers, ammunition boxes, and a few books. Everything was clean enough. Nothing looked lived in. There were no curtains, no flowers, no cloth on the table. A single coffee mug sat near the fireplace beside a stack of old cattle receipts held down by a horseshoe. Benjamin set her trunk beside the stairs. Your room's up there. Rachel looked at him. My room? He hesitated. For now. She appreciated those two words. He led her upstairs. Her room faced east. A narrow bed stood beneath the window with a quilt folded neatly across it. There was a washstand, a small chest of drawers, and a hook for her clothes. Fresh wood had been stacked beside the stove. The room was plain, but someone had prepared it. Rachel ran one finger over the quilt. Did you do this? Benjamin stood in the doorway. Some of it. The quilt? George's wife sent it before she died. Rachel looked back at him. I see. He nodded toward the stairs. Kitchen's below. That I definitely want to see. Something about the way she said it made Benjamin pause. They went down together. The kitchen was larger than she expected. That was the good news. The bad news was nearly everything else. A sack of flour stood open beside the pantry door. 3 potatoes in a crate had gone soft. 2 storage jars had cracked near their rims and been tied around with cloth, as if cloth might persuade broken pottery to remain whole. A crock of lard sat too close to the stove. Rachel opened one cabinet. Beans, coffee, salt, cornmeal, very little else. She opened another. More beans. She turned. How many men are you feeding? 8 hands. Every day? Usually. What do they eat? Benjamin looked toward the shelves. Rachel followed his eyes. You're not answering. Beans. I gathered that. Salt pork. Biscuits when someone remembers. And vegetables? When we have them. Fruit? He took a moment. Rachel stared. When you have it. Yes. She walked toward the pantry. The smell reached her before she stepped inside. Damp wood. Old onions. Something sour. She crouched beside a potato bin and picked up one that had begun to rot underneath. These should have been sorted days ago. Benjamin leaned against the doorframe. I've been busy. I wasn't criticizing you. It sounded a little like criticism. Rachel looked over her shoulder. It was observation. His mouth moved slightly. She turned back to the shelves. Behind her, boots crossed the porch. The kitchen door opened. Charlie stuck his head inside. Boss, George wants to know if we should take supper in the bunkhouse like usual. Rachel looked at Benjamin. Like usual? Benjamin nodded. The men eat over there. And you? Here. Rachel looked toward the long table in the next room. Alone? Usually. Charlie sensed something in the air and began backing out. I can tell George. Wait, Rachel said. Charlie froze. She looked at Benjamin. What are they eating tonight? Benjamin glanced toward a blackened pot near the back of the stove. Whatever's left from noon. Rachel lifted the lid. Beans, burned around the edges. A gray piece of salt pork floated near the top. She replaced the lid. Charlie looked embarrassed. Benjamin looked resigned. Rachel folded her coat over a chair. When was the supply wagon supposed to arrive? Yesterday. And? Snow delayed it below the pass. Might be tomorrow. Might be 2 days. Rachel opened the flour sack. Barely a quarter full. She checked the cornmeal. Enough for 1 skillet. The onion basket held 6 small onions, 2 sprouting. A crock contained dried beans. A hanging strip of salt pork remained usable. There were beef bones wrapped in cloth on the cold shelf near the back door. Rachel lifted the cloth. These for stock? Benjamin looked almost puzzled. For the dogs. Rachel lowered the cloth. She opened one more drawer. Dried apples. Not many, but enough. She stood still for a moment. The men behind the kitchen door had gone quiet. She could hear the wind scraping lightly against the window. Benjamin said, "Don't trouble yourself tonight. You've been traveling for days. The boys can eat what they've got." Rachel turned. The boys? The hands. The ones keeping your cattle alive in November? Benjamin's brows drew together. I didn't mean I know. She looked around the kitchen again. Beans, bones, potatoes, cornmeal, onions, apples, molasses in the bottom of a stone jar. Not much. But food had always looked different to Rachel than it did to other people. Some people saw what was missing. She saw what could be stretched. Charlie was still standing by the door. Rachel pointed toward the yard. Is there dry wood split small enough for a hot cooking fire? Yes, ma'am. Bring me an armful. Charlie looked at Benjamin. Benjamin looked at Rachel. What are you doing? Making supper. You don't have to. Rachel removed her gloves 1 finger at a time. I know. That stopped him. She rolled up her sleeves. Charlie. Yes, ma'am? The wood. He vanished. Rachel picked up the beef bones. Benjamin watched her. There isn't much here. She checked the onions again. No. I can have George butcher something. Not for one supper. He glanced at the miserable shelves. I told you the supply wagon was late. Rachel set the bones beside the stove. I'm aware. Then what exactly are you planning to feed 10 people? She looked at him. For the first time since arriving at Black Ridge, something like confidence settled fully into her posture. Not because she knew the ranch. She didn't. Not because she knew the men. She didn't. But this room, this much at least, she understood. She looked once more at the scraps everyone else had already dismissed. There's enough, she said. Outside, Charlie came running across the yard with firewood in both arms, and Benjamin Cole, who had expected his new wife to need days before she found her footing, stepped aside without another word and watched Rachel take possession of the kitchen. Rachel started with the bones. She rinsed them, set them into the largest iron pot she could find, covered them with water, and added 2 onions, split down the middle, along with a pinch of salt and the least spoiled of the potatoes. Charlie dumped the firewood beside the stove. More? He asked. Not yet. He hovered. Rachel looked over. Do you know where the cornmeal is kept? Charlie pointed to the shelf she had already checked. Then bring me that sack. He obeyed. Benjamin remained near the doorway, arms folded, watching the kitchen change under her hands. Rachel worked without wasting motion. The beans went into a smaller pot with hot water to soften. She trimmed the salt pork, cut what was usable into thin strips, and rendered it slowly in a skillet until the fat shone clear at the bottom. The smell changed first. Charlie noticed. His head came up. Rachel dropped sliced onions into the drippings. They hissed. By then, George had appeared outside the kitchen door. Daniel stood behind him. Neither man entered. They simply looked in. Rachel ignored them. The beef bones began to give up their richness. She skimmed the top with a wooden spoon, added the beans once they had softened enough, then worked the fried onions through the pot. "What are you making?" Charlie asked. "Supper." "I know that." "Then you're caught up." George coughed into his hand. Daniel turned away, shoulders moving once. Charlie looked wounded. Rachel hid a smile. She took the last of the potatoes, sliced them thick, and laid them into the same skillet where the pork had cooked. Benjamin moved closer. "Those were for tomorrow." Rachel glanced at him. "So are we." He said nothing. She turned the potatoes. "Do you have an iron pan that hasn't been used as a horseshoe tray?" Benjamin blinked. Charlie laughed before he could stop himself. George's mouth twitched. Benjamin pointed toward the bottom cabinet. "There." Rachel found a heavy cast-iron skillet, black with years of use. "Good." She mixed cornmeal with salt, a little flour, water, and the last spoonful of lard she was willing to spare. No eggs, no milk. It would have to do. When she poured the batter into the hot skillet, the edges began to sizzle immediately. Charlie leaned closer. "You gonna bake that? Unless you know another use for cornbread." "No, ma'am." George finally stepped inside. "Mrs. Cole?" "Rachel." He nodded. "Rachel, you need anything?" She looked around. "Yes." "More chairs." George frowned. "For what?" Rachel pointed with the spoon toward the long dining table in the next room. "For supper." George looked at Benjamin. Benjamin looked at Rachel. "The men usually eat in the bunkhouse," he said. "I know. There's more room over there." Rachel wiped her hands on a towel. "There's enough room here." "For 10 men?" "For 10 people." The kitchen went quiet. George looked toward the table. Charlie looked at Benjamin again. Benjamin drew a slow breath. "Rachel." She turned. "The hands can take their plates over." "They can." She waited. Benjamin's expression said he understood there was more coming. Rachel continued. "Or you can help George bring in benches and explain to 8 hungry men why supper is getting cold while you argue with your wife on her first evening." Charlie stared at the floor. Daniel made a noise that might have been a cough. George rubbed one hand over his mouth. Benjamin looked at Rachel for 3 long seconds. Then he turned. "George." "Yeah?" "Bring the bench from the porch." George nodded quickly. "Daniel, bunkhouse bench." Daniel was already moving. Charlie grinned. Benjamin caught it. "You too." The grin disappeared. "Yes, sir." Rachel turned back to the stove. She did not smile until all 3 men were outside. Behind her, Benjamin said, "You planned that." Rachel stirred the beans. "No." "Sounded planned. I've had practice getting men to move before food burns." He leaned one shoulder against the wall. "Boarding house?" "Among other places." He watched her another moment. Then, without being asked, he picked up a stack of plates. Rachel noticed. She said nothing. By 6 o'clock, the main room looked different. Not beautiful, just occupied. 2 benches ran along the table. Mismatched chairs filled the ends. Tin cups had been set beside plates. Rachel found a clean cloth in one of the drawers and spread it lengthwise down the center. The 8 hands entered cautiously. George first, Daniel behind him. Charlie came in last, as if trying to make sure nobody changed the arrangement before he got there. The remaining men introduced themselves in a jumble Rachel only half caught. Henry Pike, Samuel Lowe, Ed Turner, Luke Harris, and Will Carson. All of them removed their hats. None seemed sure where to stand. Rachel pointed. Sit. 8 cowboys obeyed. Benjamin came in from washing at the pump. He stopped when he saw the table. For years, that room had probably looked exactly the same every evening. Now steam rose from bowls. The cornbread sat in the center, browned around the edges. A platter of fried potatoes and onions passed one way. Beans and beef broth went the other. The dried apples had been simmered with molasses and a little hot water until they softened into something close to a sweet dish. Benjamin took his usual chair at the end. Rachel remained standing. He looked at her. You're eating. I will. Sit. She raised an eyebrow. He remembered himself. A brief pause. Please. Rachel took the empty chair beside Charlie. For the first minute, nobody said much. Spoons scraped bowls. Tin cups touched wood. The wind pressed at the window. Charlie ate too fast. George noticed. Slow down, boy. Charlie swallowed. I am. You ain't. Rachel watched Charlie reach for the cornbread. Then stop halfway. Can I? You don't need permission, she said. He took a piece. Bit into it. His eyes widened. Rachel pretended not to notice. He chewed, then looked at her. Mrs. Cole? Rachel. Rachel. Is there more? George said. You've still got half that piece. I mean after. Someone laughed. It was Daniel. A short laugh. Then Henry Pike said, Boy asks about second helpings before the first ones reached his stomach. Charlie pointed at him with the cornbread. You ate 3 biscuits at noon. Those weren't biscuits. They were supposed to be. Another laugh. This one came from farther down the table. The room loosened. A story began about one of the horses getting into the laundry line the previous spring. Then another about George falling into the creek while trying to repair a fence. George objected to the details. Daniel added worse ones. Charlie stole the last fried onion from Samuel's plate and got his knuckles slapped with a spoon. Rachel refilled coffee. At some point she realized Benjamin had stopped eating. He was sitting with one hand around his mug, watching the table. Not her. All of it. George laughing. Charlie talking with his mouth full. Daniel arguing about whether a mule could be trusted. Men who had been nearly silent in the yard now interrupting one another, leaning across the table, reaching for the same bread. Benjamin looked almost puzzled. Rachel met his eyes. He held the look for a moment, then lowered his gaze to his plate. Later, when the stew pot was scraped nearly clean and the molasses apples were gone, the men still did not leave. That was the part Benjamin seemed to notice most. Usually, he told Rachel later, they ate and went. Tonight, George poured another cup of coffee. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Charlie rested both elbows on the table until Rachel tapped one with a spoon. Off. He straightened immediately. Sorry. The others laughed again. Benjamin did too. It was barely a sound. Rachel heard it. So did George. The foreman looked toward his boss, then quickly away. At last chairs began scraping backward. One by one the hands stood. Each man thanked Rachel, some awkwardly, some with a nod. Charlie lingered longest. Tomorrow night too? Rachel looked at him. Supper? He nodded. If there's food, there better be. George caught the back of his coat and pulled him toward the door. Go feed something that can't answer back. Charlie disappeared, protesting. The room emptied. Silence returned slowly. But not the old silence. This one felt used. Warm. The air still smelled of onions, coffee, wood smoke, and cornbread. Rachel began collecting plates. Benjamin stood near the end of the table. You don't have to wash those tonight. They don't wash themselves. I can help. Rachel looked at him. His sleeves were already rolled. All right. They carried dishes into the kitchen. He washed. She dried. It was so ordinary that Rachel almost found it stranger than the wedding. Benjamin's hands looked enormous around the tin plates. He broke the silence first. They've never stayed that long. Rachel kept drying. Who? The men. She set one plate on the shelf. Maybe they were hungry. They're always hungry. Then maybe they liked the cornbread. They've had cornbread. Not mine. That almost smile again. Then it faded. Benjamin rinsed another plate. My father used to make everyone eat together on Sundays. Rachel glanced at him. He was looking into the wash basin. After he died, I stopped. Why? Benjamin took a while to answer. Seemed easier. Rachel set the towel down. Was it? His hands became still in the water. Outside, a horse kicked once against a stallboard. No, he said. Nothing more. Rachel picked up the towel again. They finished the dishes without speaking. When the last plate was put away, Benjamin dried his hands. He looked through the kitchen doorway toward the long table. Empty now. But cups had left faint rings in the cloth. A crumb of cornbread rested beside Charlie's chair. Someone had forgotten a spoon. Benjamin stood there long enough for Rachel to notice. Then he said, You made more than supper tonight. Rachel leaned one hip against the counter. I made beans. He looked at her. You know what I mean. She did. That was why she looked away. She picked up the forgotten spoon. I'm tired. Benjamin nodded immediately. Of course. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Rachel. She turned. Thank you. Not Mrs. Cole. Not ma'am. Rachel. She looked at the giant cowboy standing in the half-lit kitchen. His sleeves rolled, his hands still damp from dishwater, and realized this was the first time he had said her name as if it belonged naturally in his mouth. You're welcome, she said. Benjamin went upstairs. Rachel remained alone beside the cooling stove. Through the wall, she could faintly hear the ranch hands outside, still talking as they crossed toward the bunkhouse, still laughing. She looked toward the table. That morning it had belonged to no one. Tonight, 10 people had crowded around it. Rachel did not know yet what Black Ridge would become. She did not know what Benjamin would become to her. But she understood something she had learned years ago in crowded boarding house kitchens. Food filled a stomach. A table could do something else. And upstairs, Benjamin Cole lay awake longer than usual, listening to laughter fade across a ranch that had forgotten the sound of it. By the end of Rachel's first week at Black Ridge, nobody asked where supper would be served. They simply came to the house. Not all at once. George was usually first, washing at the pump before the light went. Daniel came straight from the horse barn, with his sleeves rolled and bits of hay clinging to his coat. Charlie arrived whenever the smell reached him, which was often early enough that Rachel had to send him back outside twice before anything was ready. On Tuesday, he appeared carrying 3 trout. Rachel looked from the fish to him. Where did these come from? Creek. I assumed they didn't grow in your pocket. Charlie grinned. Daniel showed me a spot below the beaver dam. Daniel stepped through the doorway behind him. Boy nearly went in after them. I did not. You had one boot full of water. That's not the same thing. Rachel took the trout. Both of you wash before you touch my table. Charlie looked at Daniel. Her table. Daniel nodded gravely. Best remember that. Rachel heard them laughing as they went back outside. The phrase stayed. Not because she announced it. Not because Benjamin did. But within 2 weeks, the long table in the main room had quietly become Mrs. Cole's table. A handful of wild onions appeared one afternoon beside the kitchen door. Someone left venison wrapped in clean cloth on the cold shelf. George brought in a jar of chokecherry preserves from his sister's place farther down the valley and set it on the counter without comment. Charlie came home from Silver Creek with a sack of flour slung over one shoulder and the pride of a man returning with gold. Rachel stared at it. Where did you get that? Won it. Benjamin looked up from a cattle receipt near the fireplace. Rachel turned slowly. Won it how? Charlie hesitated. Cards. With whose money? My own. How much? Charlie looked toward the ceiling as if the answer might be written there. Charlie. 50 cents. Rachel folded her arms. And you risked 50 cents to win flour. I knew you'd use it. That took some of the force out of her glare. Benjamin lowered the receipt enough to hide what looked suspiciously like amusement. Rachel pointed toward the pantry. Put it on the second shelf. Charlie beamed. Yes, ma'am. And don't gamble away your winter wages. His smile vanished. Yes, ma'am. Benjamin waited until Charlie left. You scared him. Good. He isn't easily scared. He ought to be scared of being poor in February. Benjamin gave one short nod. Fair. That word again. Rachel turned back to the stove, but she was smiling. The table changed more than the meals. That surprised her. Men who barely spoke during work began talking once they had coffee in front of them and something hot on their plates. One evening, George mentioned that 2 calves in the north pasture had developed a cough. Benjamin's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Since when? Yesterday. Why didn't you tell me? George shrugged. Was going to in the morning. Rachel looked at Benjamin. He noticed. What? Nothing. It wasn't nothing. She took a sip of coffee. You asked what happened at supper. I haven't asked yet. You were going to. Benjamin stared at her. George cleared his throat. Charlie whispered to Daniel. He's learning. Benjamin heard him. Charlie. Yes, sir? Eat. Another evening, Daniel complained that the wagon trail along Cottonwood Bend had washed badly enough that the next supply run might lose a wheel if the driver stayed on the usual line. Benjamin leaned back. Why haven't I heard about that? Daniel shrugged. You don't ride the supply wagon. Rachel said, Maybe that's why. Benjamin turned toward her. She kept buttering a piece of bread. The next morning, he rode out before dawn to inspect Cottonwood Bend. By noon, 3 men were cutting a safer track higher along the slope. After that, Benjamin started asking questions. Not during supper, after. He would remain at the table when the others went back to the bunkhouse, turning his coffee mug slowly between both hands. What did you hear tonight? Rachel always knew what he meant. Samuel's worried about winter pay. Benjamin's brow tightened. He say that? Not directly. Then how do you know, huh? He asked George whether the cattle sale was happening before Christmas, and then said his sister might need help with heating coal. Benjamin went quiet. Rachel continued. Daniel thinks the bay mare needs a different bit. Charlie's hiding a tear in his left glove because he thinks you'll tell him to buy another pair. George's right shoulder hurts when the weather turns. Benjamin stared at her. How do you know about George's shoulder? He keeps rubbing it when he thinks nobody's watching. You notice a lot. Rachel folded the dish towel beside her plate. People tell you things when they think you're listening. His eyes stayed on her longer than necessary. Then he looked down at his cup. The next morning, Rachel found a new pair of work gloves on Charlie's usual chair. No note, no explanation. Charlie picked them up and stared toward Benjamin, who was checking figures in the ledger. Boss? Benjamin didn't look up. Winter's cold. Charlie turned the gloves over in his hands. Thank you. Benjamin grunted. Rachel watched from the pantry doorway. He caught her looking. She raised one eyebrow. His expression said clearly, "Don't." She went back to the pantry before he could see her smile. Their own habits formed almost as quietly. Rachel learned Benjamin left the house by 5:30 most mornings. She began leaving coffee near the back door in a covered mug so it wouldn't lose heat while he pulled on his coat. The first morning she did it, he stopped. What's this? Coffee. I can see that. Then we're making progress. His gaze lifted to hers. She kept kneading biscuit dough. I didn't ask you to make it. No. You don't have to, I know. He stood there another second, then took the mug. When he came back that evening, the loose shelf above the flour bin no longer tilted. Rachel noticed fresh screws in the brackets. She found Benjamin outside sharpening a draw knife on a stone. You fixed the shelf. It was loose. I know. You were keeping flour under it. I know that too. He glanced up. Rachel waited. Neither said thank you. Neither needed to. The strangest change happened after supper. At first, Benjamin had always moved to the chair beside the fireplace once the dishes were cleared. Now he stayed, sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes an hour. Rachel would mend a shirt, sort receipts, or mark pantry supplies in a small notebook while he worked through ranch figures. They spoke when there was something to say. When there wasn't, they didn't. Rachel had not known silence could feel companionable. One evening she looked up from a stack of laundry and found Benjamin watching her. Charlie stood at the kitchen counter behind her, his hand creeping toward a tray of cooling biscuits. Rachel did not turn around. Charlie. His hand stopped. I didn't touch anything. You were about to. I was checking whether they were cool. With your mouth? Daniel snorted from the table. Charlie withdrew his hand. Rachel turned, pointed a wooden spoon toward the door, and said, 10 minutes. That's cruel. 8. Charlie fled before the number became smaller. The room broke into laughter. Rachel shook her head. Then she saw Benjamin. He was smiling. Not the almost smile he usually allowed. A real one. It changed his whole face. The hard lines around his mouth eased. His eyes looked younger. For a brief second, he looked less like Big Ben Cole, the mountain rancher men stepped aside for, and more like a man caught enjoying something he had forgotten to expect. Their eyes met. His smile disappeared immediately. He looked down at the ledger. Rachel's hands went still on the folded towel. Benjamin cleared his throat. Boy'll steal the whole kitchen if you let him. Probably. He likes you. Rachel looked toward the door Charlie had gone through. He likes biscuits. Benjamin's fingers tightened around his pencil. Not just the biscuits. She knew what he meant. That made her uncomfortable in a way criticism never did. Rachel folded another towel. The ranch is settling. Benjamin looked up. It's changing. Same thing. No. She paused. His voice was quiet. Not the same thing. The wind moved through the chimney. Somewhere in the bunkhouse, Charlie shouted about a missing boot. Benjamin looked around the room, at the shelves, at the table, at Rachel. Then back to the ledger. She felt the old caution rise before she could stop it. The ranch needed what she did. The meals, the order, the listening. She knew how quickly being needed could imitate being wanted. She had made that mistake before. Rachel lowered her eyes to the towel in her hands. "There's a church social in Silver Creek Sunday," Benjamin said. She looked up. "George mentioned it. I usually don't go, but—" He rubbed his thumb along the pencil. "I thought you might want to." Rachel waited. "With me?" Benjamin met her eyes. "You're my wife." "That isn't what I asked." He was quiet. Then he nodded once. "With me." Rachel's fingers tightened slightly around the linen, all right. Benjamin returned to the ledger. Rachel returned to the laundry. Neither said anything else. But later that night, alone in her room, Rachel opened her trunk and looked at the better of her two dresses. She touched the sleeve, then shut the trunk again. Downstairs, Benjamin sat beside the dying fire with the same page of figures open in front of him for nearly 20 minutes. Outside, snow lay pale across Black Ridge. And 3 days away in Silver Creek, a woman named Margaret Hale was about to look at Rachel Bennett Cole and remind her exactly what the rest of the world had always expected Benjamin's wife to be. Sunday morning broke clear and bitter. The storm had moved east during the night, leaving the mountains sharp against a blue sky and the ranch yard covered in snow that squeaked beneath boots. Rachel stood before the mirror in her room, fastening the cuffs of her dark green dress. It was the best one she owned. Not fashionable, not delicate. But the wool was good, the seams were straight, and the color brought warmth into her face. She pinned her hair twice before she was satisfied. Then she caught herself doing it a third time. "Enough," she muttered. A knock sounded at the door. "Yes?" Benjamin's voice came through the wood. "Wagon's ready. I'll be down." There was a pause. Then his footsteps moved away. Rachel looked at herself once more. She had learned long ago that mirrors could become cruel if you stood in front of them too long. So she picked up her gloves and left. Benjamin waited beside the wagon wearing his black town coat and a clean hat. When Rachel stepped onto the porch, he looked up. His gaze stayed on her. Not long. Long enough, Rachel descended the steps. "You look nice," he said. She adjusted one glove. "You already used that line at the wedding." His brow lifted, still true. Something warm moved under her ribs. She ignored it. The road to Silver Creek took nearly 3 hours because packed snow had turned slick along Cottonwood Bend. Benjamin kept the team slow. At one narrow descent, the wagon shifted sideways half a foot. Rachel gripped the seat. Benjamin's arm came out in front of her without thought. Not touching, just there. A barrier between her and the drop from the bench. The wagon straightened. He lowered his arm. Neither mentioned it. Silver Creek looked different on Sunday. The saloon doors were shut. Horses crowded the rail outside the church. Families crossed the road carrying pies, baskets, covered dishes, and children wrapped in wool. The social was being held in the meeting hall behind the chapel, where long tables had been pushed against the walls and decorated with evergreen branches. Conversation changed slightly when Benjamin entered. Rachel heard it. Not silence, just the small lowering of voices that happens when someone interesting walks into a room. Benjamin seemed not to notice, or had long practice pretending he didn't. Rachel removed her coat. Then she saw the woman near the far table. Margaret Hale did not need introduction. Rachel knew immediately. She was slender and tall, perhaps 30, with chestnut hair arranged neatly beneath a small felt hat. Her blue dress was fitted at the waist and trimmed with black braid. She stood with one hand resting lightly on a chair, while 3 women listened to whatever she was saying. She belonged in the room in a way Rachel had never learned to belong anywhere. Then Margaret looked across the hall. Her eyes found Benjamin. Her face brightened. Ben. Rachel felt the name before she understood why. Nobody at Black Ridge called him Ben. Not George. Not Charlie. Not even Rachel. Margaret crossed the room. Benjamin removed his hat. Margaret. She smiled up at him. I heard the rumor, but I didn't quite believe it. Her eyes moved to Rachel. The smile remained. The warmth did not. This must be your wife. Benjamin turned slightly. Rachel, Margaret Hale, Thomas Hale's sister. Rachel held out her hand. Mrs. Hale. Miss Hale. Margaret took her hand briefly. Of course. The correction was gentle enough to pass for manners. Rachel let it pass. Margaret studied her dress, her shoulders, her waist. It was a familiar inspection. Rachel kept her face still. So, Margaret said, Black Ridge finally has a mistress. Apparently. Benjamin glanced at Rachel. Margaret laughed lightly. I always wondered what kind of woman would convince Benjamin Cole to marry. Rachel said, So did he, from what I gather. Benjamin looked toward the floor for half a second. Margaret's smile tightened. Then she turned back to him. You remember the winter gathering at the Langfords? The year the fiddler got drunk before supper? I remember. You danced every set that night. That doesn't sound like me. You were younger. I was 26. Exactly. Rachel looked toward the refreshment table. She did not need to hear stories about the younger Benjamin from a woman who had apparently known how to make him dance. I'll get some coffee, she said. Benjamin turned immediately. I'll come. You don't need to. I know. That stopped her for a moment. His own words, used back at her. They walked together. Rachel could feel Margaret watching. At the coffee urn, Benjamin took a cup and poured for Rachel before filling his own. You all right? Why wouldn't I be? He glanced toward Margaret. Rachel followed his eyes. I'm not frightened of pretty women, Benjamin. I didn't say you were. No. You're just standing beside me like I'm about to be attacked by one. His mouth twitched. Margaret doesn't attack. Of course not. Rachel took the cup. Women like Margaret rarely have to. Before Benjamin could answer, Reverend Collins called everyone toward the center of the room. Someone had brought a fiddle. The tables were pushed farther back. A few couples began dancing. Rachel immediately understood her mistake in coming. She should have anticipated this. At the boarding house, she had watched dances through doorways. She knew the steps. Knowing them was not the same as wanting to perform them while half a frontier town examined the strange new wife of Big Ben Cole. Margaret appeared beside them again. Benjamin. He looked at her. You can't come to a social and stand against the wall all afternoon. I've done it before. Many times. She smiled, then looked at Rachel. I suppose married men have different obligations. There it was. Soft, almost kind. Rachel recognized the blade anyway. Margaret's gaze settled on Rachel's figure. Though I imagine you've chosen a very practical wife. 2 women nearby suddenly became interested in arranging plates. Rachel's coffee cup went still in her hand. Practical. She had heard versions of it all her life. Strong, useful, capable, good-hearted. Words people offered when they carefully avoided another word. Benjamin set down his cup. Rachel looked at him. His face had changed very little, but his jaw had settled. Margaret must have seen it too. Before he could speak, Rachel said, "I am practical." Margaret blinked. Rachel smiled politely. "It saved me considerable trouble." The fiddler began another tune. Benjamin looked at Rachel, then held out his hand. "Dance with me," where Rachel stared. "Benjamin." "You know how?" "That's not the issue." "What's the issue?" She lowered her voice. "Everyone is looking." His eyes swept the room once, then returned to her. "Let them tire themselves looking." Rachel's breath caught. His hand remained between them. Huge. Steady. Waiting. Not pulling. Not insisting. Rachel set down her coffee, then placed her hand in his. The room did not actually go silent. It only felt that way. Benjamin led her toward the open floor. Rachel's first step was too small. His was too large. They nearly collided. She whispered, "You are built for walking behind cattle, not dancing." "I warned you." "You did not." "I said I wasn't good company." "That covers dancing?" "Most things." She laughed before she could stop herself. His hand settled carefully against her back. He could almost span half her waist, but there was no hesitation in his touch, no embarrassment, no sense that he wished she occupied less room beneath his hand. Rachel looked up. Benjamin was watching her. Not the crowd. Not Margaret. Her. "Left," she murmured. "I know. You nearly stepped on me." Boot slipped. "On a dry floor?" "Bad floor." Rachel shook her head. The second turn went better. By the third, they found a rhythm. Slow, uneven. The fiddle scratched through a waltz while boots moved across pine boards. Rachel could still feel eyes on her, but the sensation changed. Benjamin's thumb rested near the seam at the back of her dress. Careful still. She realized he was nervous too. That helped. When the music ended, he did not release her immediately. Only a heartbeat. Then his hand dropped. Applause rose for the fiddler. Rachel stepped away. Margaret stood near the wall. Her expression was perfectly composed. Only her eyes had changed. Later, Rachel went outside for air, while Benjamin spoke with George Morrison, a rancher from the lower valley. Snow melted from the church roof in slow drops. Two men stood around the corner of the meeting hall. Rachel recognized one voice. Thomas Hale, Margaret's older brother. "Coals stretched thin already," Thomas was saying. The other man replied too softly to catch. Thomas continued. "2 winters like the last one cost him more than cattle. His father left notes nobody talks about. Black Ridge looks strong because coal looks strong. That's not the same thing." Rachel stopped. A wagon passed on the road, wheels crunching over snow. "Will he make spring?" A pause. Thomas answered, "If winter closes early, I wouldn't wager on it." Rachel stepped back before either man came around the corner. Her coffee no longer felt warm in her stomach. Benjamin had told her about the ranch, about cattle, roads, supplies, winter. He had not mentioned debt. When she returned inside, he was waiting near the door with her coat over one arm. "Ready?" Rachel looked at him, at the broad shoulders, the clean black coat. The man half the valley seemed to assume could carry anything put onto him. "Yes," she said. On the ride home, the sun dropped behind the bitter roots and turned the snowfields pale gold. For nearly an hour, Rachel said nothing. Benjamin noticed. He always noticed more than he admitted. "Margaret bother you?" Rachel looked at him, no. He waited. She pulled the blanket higher over her knees. Thomas Hale said, "Black Ridge may not survive the winter." Benjamin's hands tightened on the reins, only slightly. But Rachel saw it. The wagon continued along the frozen road. "Did he?" Benjamin said. "Yes." Another mile passed before Rachel spoke again. "Was he lying?" Benjamin looked ahead. That was answer enough to make the cold feel sharper. Rachel watched his profile. The man who had asked for honesty before their wedding had just shown her there were truths he had not yet trusted her with. She did not accuse him. Not yet. Instead, she faced the mountain road. Benjamin drove beside her in silence. Their hands rested only inches apart on the bench. Neither moved closer. Behind them, Silver Creek disappeared into evening. Ahead, Black Ridge waited under the first hard signs of winter, and Rachel understood that the home beginning to feel warm around her might be standing on ground far less secure than she had believed. Benjamin did not explain himself on the ride home. Rachel did not ask again. By the time the wagon reached Black Ridge, darkness had settled over the basin, and the temperature had dropped hard enough to silver the water trough with new ice. George came out with a lantern to open the gate. Charlie followed, coat half-buttoned and hair flattened on one side from sleep. "Thought you two got lost," Charlie said. Benjamin handed him the reins. "Get the team rubbed down." Charlie looked at Rachel. "How was the social?" Rachel climbed carefully from the wagon. "Educational." Charlie frowned. George took one look at Benjamin's face and said, "Boy, maybe save the questions." Charlie nodded. "Yes, sir." Inside the house, Rachel removed her gloves and laid them beside the stove. Benjamin stood in the doorway. She could feel him deciding whether to speak. Finally, he said, "You deserve to hear it from me." Rachel turned. "The debt?" "Yes." "Then why didn't I?" Benjamin looked toward the table. "Because I thought I could settle it before it became your concern." Rachel folded her coat over the chair. "I married into the ranch." "I know." "Do you?" His eyes lifted. Rachel kept her voice even. "You told me before the wedding that I would not be hired help. You said if you treated me that way, I should tell you." Benjamin's jaw tightened. "You're telling me?" "Yes." He nodded once. "Fair." The word did not soften her this time. Rachel moved toward the stairs. "Good night, Benjamin." He stayed by the kitchen door. "Good night, Rachel." The next morning, Black Ridge woke under 6 inches of snow. Work began before sunrise. By breakfast, the ranch hands had tracked half the yard into the entryway. George wanted 2 men repairing a broken fence near the south pasture. Daniel had a mare with a swollen fetlock. Benjamin was already outside before Rachel came downstairs. She kept busy. That was easier. She sorted potatoes again, checked the dried beans, and counted the flour remaining from Charlie's card game victory. Then she noticed something odd. The supply wagon had arrived late the previous afternoon while they were in Silver Creek. 3 new flour sacks sat in the pantry. Rachel dragged one toward the light. 50 pounds, according to the stencil. She lifted it. Her hands paused. It did not feel like 50 pounds. Rachel had spent too many years moving flour sacks not to know the difference. She pulled the kitchen scale from beneath the counter. 42 pounds. The second sack weighed 41.5. The third, 43. Rachel stood still. Then she checked the coffee tin. The delivery receipt pinned beside the pantry door listed 12 pounds. She found 9. Salt was short too. Molasses by nearly a gallon. Rachel took the receipt down. Hail Freight and Supply. Her eyes narrowed. By noon, she had 6 weeks of receipts spread across the long table. Benjamin entered carrying snow on his shoulders. He stopped when he saw the papers. What happened? Rachel pointed to the nearest sack. Lift that. Benjamin looked at it. Why? Just lift it. He did. His expression changed. That's not 50 pounds. No. He set it down. Rachel slid the receipt toward him. We paid for 50. Benjamin looked at the other sacks. Could have split on the road. All 3? His eyes moved to hers. Rachel tapped the paper. And coffee. Salt. Molasses. Benjamin went quiet. How far back? I don't know yet. She held up another receipt. At least a month. Benjamin pulled out a chair. Who picked up the deliveries? Different men. George twice, Daniel once, Charlie once. Rachel heard the direction his thoughts were taking. No. Benjamin looked at her. No what? Don't accuse one of your hands. If goods are missing between town and here, they may not be missing between town and here. He frowned. Rachel pushed the receipts toward him. Look at the handwriting. The quantities had been entered in one hand, the totals in another. A darker ink, cleaner numbers. Benjamin leaned closer. Rachel pointed. These figures were altered after the original entries. He picked up one receipt. Could be Hale's clerk. Could be. Could be one of ours. Could be. She met his eyes. But not until we know. The silence between them held yesterday's argument inside it. Benjamin looked back at the papers, then nodded. All right. Rachel's shoulders eased slightly. All right. For 3 days, she checked everything. Old receipts, pantry marks, supply ledgers, notes written in the margins of delivery slips. She found a pattern. The shortages were small each time, never enough to cause alarm. 5 pounds of flour, 2 pounds of coffee, a little salt, 1 gallon of lamp oil. But repeated over months, the difference became significant. On the 4th evening, Rachel carried a stack of papers into Benjamin's office. He was standing over a desk covered in cattle sale figures. Sit, she said. He looked up. Rachel realized what she had said. Benjamin's eyebrow moved. She exhaled. Please. He sat. Rachel placed the receipts before him. The shortages all trace back to Hale Freight. Benjamin's face hardened. Thomas. Yes. You're sure? No. He looked at her sharply. Rachel sat opposite him. I'm sure the goods were short before they reached Black Ridge. I'm sure the receipts were altered. I'm sure Hale's company handled every order. She paused. I'm not sure Thomas ordered it. Benjamin leaned back. He owns the freight line. Owners don't always know what clerks do. Thomas knows his business. Then we prove that too. His fingers tapped once against the desk. Rachel noticed. A habit she had not seen before. Different from the coffee mug. This one meant anger. She drew another sheet from beneath the receipts. There's something else. Benjamin looked at it. What? A payment notice tucked behind October's supply account. His hand stopped. Rachel slid it across. The document carried the seal of a lending office in Helena. Payment assigned. New holder listed as Western Territorial Holdings. Benjamin went still. Rachel watched him. You know that name? No. But you know what this is. He took the paper. His mouth tightened. One of my father's notes. Rachel waited. Benjamin read the notice twice, then opened a drawer in the desk and removed a bundle tied with leather cord. He untied it. More notes, more payment schedules, more signatures. Rachel saw dates going back years. You told me the ranch had debt, she said. Not how much. No. How much, Benjamin? He looked at the desk. Enough. That's not a number. It's enough that one bad cattle sale hurts. And two? He did not answer. Rachel understood. She looked at the notices. How many of these have been transferred? Benjamin began sorting. 1, 2, 3. Then a fourth. All to different holding companies. Rachel read the names. Western Territorial Holdings, Frontier Land Company, North Basin Investment. None meant anything to her. She picked up one page. The addresses. Benjamin looked. 2 were Helena, 1 Butte, 1 Silver Creek. Rachel pointed to the Silver Creek address, a small office on Mill Street. She knew that building. They had passed it after the church social. A painted sign downstairs. Hail Freight and Supply. Benjamin stood so suddenly the chair scraped hard against the floor. Thomas. Rachel remained seated. Looks that way. He's been buying the notes. Through other names. Trying to hide it. Benjamin turned toward the window. Snow moved against the glass. Rachel watched his shoulders. For a man as large as Benjamin, stillness made him look more dangerous than movement. Why? She asked. He answered without turning. The north grazing line. Rachel waited. Black Ridge controls the easiest pass from the upper valley to the southern stock road. Hale has wanted it for years. He wants the ranch. He wants enough of it. Rachel looked down at the altered receipts. The shortages. Pressure. The debt purchases. More pressure. Until you can't pay. Benjamin turned back. And then he offers to take land instead. The office felt suddenly smaller. Rachel looked at the papers. She had thought she was counting flour. Instead, she had found a hand tightening around Black Ridge, one finger at a time. Benjamin braced both palms on the desk. I should have seen this. Rachel looked at him. You were watching cattle. His eyes lifted. He was watching you. Benjamin gave a humorless breath. And you were watching flour. Rachel almost smiled. Someone had to. For the first time since Silver Creek, the distance between them shifted. Not gone, but changed. Benjamin looked at the receipts again, then at Rachel. I should have told you about the debt. Yes. I thought I was protecting you from a problem. You were keeping me outside it. He nodded. I know, that was all. No excuse. Rachel let the silence settle. Then Benjamin pushed half the papers toward her. What do you think we do next? Rachel looked at the stack, then at him. It was the first time he had asked her about something this large. Not food, not the house, the ranch. She drew the nearest receipt closer. We don't accuse Thomas yet. Benjamin's jaw tightened. We prove it. He sat down again. Rachel pulled the lamp nearer. Outside, the wind moved down from the bitter roots and struck the house in long, low gusts. Inside, husband and wife bent over the same papers. Neither noticed when the kitchen clock passed 10. And somewhere beyond Black Ridge, Thomas Hale was about to learn that the woman he had dismissed as Big Ben Cole's practical new bride had begun pulling apart the scheme he thought no one would ever see. Thomas Hale did not come to Black Ridge. That would have been too simple. For nearly a week, nothing happened. The supply wagon arrived on time, and every sack Rachel weighed matched the receipt almost exactly. 50 pounds of flour meant 50 pounds. Coffee came sealed. Lamp oil arrived in the quantity charged. Thomas knew. Rachel became certain of it on the second delivery. Someone had told him Black Ridge was checking. Benjamin said the same thing when she showed him the figures. He closed the leak. For now, Rachel said, means we were right. It means he knows we're looking. Benjamin leaned against the pantry door. That bother you? Rachel tied the flour sack closed. Yes. He seemed surprised by the answer. She looked at him. A man who cheats carelessly is easier than a man who knows when to stop. Benjamin's eyes rested on her a moment. You're getting to know ranching. No. She wiped flour from her hands. I'm getting to know men. The corner of his mouth moved. The tension between them had eased since the night they discovered the transferred notes, not vanished. Rachel still remembered the debt he had kept from her. Benjamin seemed to remember it too. Now, when something arrived by post, he left it on the table where she could see it. When George brought cattle figures in from the south pasture, Benjamin sometimes pushed the sheet toward Rachel after supper. What do you make of that? The first time he did it, she almost asked whether he was serious. Instead, she studied the figures. Little things. That was how trust seemed to work with Benjamin. Not in speeches. In doors quietly left open. Then Margaret Hale came to Silver Creek. Rachel learned about it from Daniel. He had gone down for horseshoes and returned after dark with a paper parcel under one arm and an expression that made George stop talking when he entered the bunkhouse. At supper, Daniel barely touched his beans. Rachel noticed. Benjamin did too. What happened in town? Benjamin asked. Daniel looked at his plate. Nothing worth repeating. George grunted. Then it's probably exactly what needs repeating. Daniel rubbed his thumb along the edge of his cup. Rachel waited. Finally, he said, Folks are talking. Benjamin's shoulders changed. About what? Daniel looked toward Rachel. That was enough. She set down her fork. Say it. Mrs. Cole. Rachel. Daniel sighed. Margaret Hale was at Finch's store yesterday. Rachel glanced at Benjamin. He had gone completely still. Daniel continued. She didn't say it like an accusation. Not exactly. George muttered. That's how the worst things get said. What did she say? Rachel asked. Daniel looked uncomfortable. That you knew Black Ridge was in trouble before you came here. Silence. Charlie stopped chewing. Rachel felt the room narrow around the words. Daniel continued carefully. She said somebody back east told Thomas you answered the marriage notice because you knew Mr. Cole needed a wife and needed money worse. Benjamin's chair creaked beneath his hand. Rachel said, Money? Daniel nodded. That you figured a rancher with debts would be easier to manage. He nearly swallowed the last word. Rachel sat very still. The insult itself, episum, was familiar in shape. Not the same words, but the same idea. A woman like her could not simply be chosen. There must be a trick, a scheme, a practical exchange hidden somewhere behind it. Charlie spoke first. That's stupid. George looked at him. Charlie flushed but kept going. She didn't even know where we kept the flour when she got here. Nobody laughed. Rachel almost did. Benjamin pushed back from the table. That's enough. His voice was quiet. Daniel nodded. I figured you'd want to know before it got farther. You did right. Daniel looked relieved. Supper ended early. Not because Rachel dismissed anyone, because the table had lost its ease. The men carried their dishes into the kitchen and left one by one. Charlie lingered. He looked at Rachel. I don't believe it. Rachel folded a dish towel. I know. Nobody does. She glanced toward the closed front door. Somebody does, or it wouldn't be traveling. Charlie opened his mouth. George caught his shoulder. Come on. The room emptied. Benjamin stood near the fireplace. Rachel washed the remaining plates. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Benjamin said, Margaret shouldn't have done that. Rachel kept her hands in the water. No. I'll ride into town tomorrow. She turned. For what? To put an end to it. How? Talk to Thomas? Rachel dried her hands slowly. And tell him what? Stop spreading gossip about my wife? If that's what it takes, he'll deny it. Benjamin's jaw tightened. Then I'll talk to Margaret, and she'll say she was only repeating what she heard. He said nothing. Rachel hung the towel over the chair. Don't chase it. His eyes narrowed. You want me to do nothing. I want you to know what you believe before you start defending it. That landed. Benjamin looked at her. Rachel held his gaze. What does that mean? It means if you ride into Silver Creek tomorrow because you're angry someone insulted your wife, fine. Her voice stayed level. But if some part of you is riding down there because you're wondering whether they're right, I'd rather you stay here. Benjamin's expression hardened. I didn't say I believed them. You didn't say you didn't. Silence filled the room. Rachel heard the stove tick as it cooled. Benjamin looked away first. That frightened her more than anger would have. Benjamin. He rubbed one hand over his jaw. I don't know why Thomas would spread something he knows I can prove false. Because truth isn't the point. Maybe. Rachel studied him. There was something else behind his face, something older. Not Thomas, not Margaret. She saw it before he said a word. Who was she? Benjamin looked at her sharply. Rachel continued. The woman before me. His eyes dropped. A long pause. Her name was Ellen. Rachel said nothing. Benjamin moved to the window. We were supposed to marry 8 years ago. The darkness outside reflected his broad shape back into the room. She liked the idea of the ranch when cattle prices were good, when my father was alive, when there were dances in town and money enough not to think about winter. His hand rested on the window frame. Then came a bad year. My father got sick. We lost cattle. I borrowed money. Rachel understood before he finished. She left. Yes. Because of the debt? She said because of the life. He gave a dry breath. Maybe both. Rachel stared at his back. The distance between them suddenly felt different. This was not about whether Benjamin thought Rachel capable of deceit. It was about whether some wounded part of him believed history repeated itself when happiness lasted too long. She walked to the table. Look at me. Benjamin turned slowly. You asked me to trust you when you said the debt wasn't meant to shut me out. He nodded. I'm asking the same thing now. His face tightened. Rachel's voice dropped. Do you believe I came here because I knew you were desperate? Benjamin did not answer quickly enough. That was the answer. Rachel felt something inside her go quiet. Not break, quiet. Rachel, do you? His eyes moved over her face. I don't know what to believe yet. The words were barely above a murmur. They landed harder than if he had shouted. Rachel stood motionless. Benjamin took one step toward her. She stepped back. His face changed immediately. Rachel, no. I didn't mean... You meant exactly what you said. I mean, I need time to understand where this came from. She laughed once. There was no humor in it. You've had weeks to understand where I came from. He went still. Rachel untied her apron. Her fingers worked carefully at the knot behind her waist. That bothered Benjamin more than tears might have. She folded the apron once, placed it beside his plate, the same place where she had set his supper nearly every night since arriving. Benjamin looked down at it. What are you doing? Taking you at your word. What word? That you don't know who I am. He looked up. I didn't say that. You said you don't know what to believe. Rachel. She pushed the apron toward him. You can feed your own ranch until you decide. Benjamin stared at her. Outside, wind struck the side of the house. The table between them seemed longer than it had ever been. I never asked you to cook for the men. No. I never treated you like you owed us that. No. Then don't turn this into... Into what? Her voice rose for the first time. Not loud. Sharp. Into me being useful until I become inconvenient? Benjamin stopped. Rachel's breath came harder now. I told you before we married exactly what I couldn't do again. I remember. Do you? She touched the apron. I can survive being laughed at in Silver Creek. I can survive Margaret Hale deciding I'm too large, too plain, too practical, too whatever else she thinks I am. Her eyes stayed on his. But I will not stand in my own kitchen and prove to my husband that I didn't marry him for money I didn't know existed. Benjamin's face had gone pale beneath the weathered skin. Rachel stepped away from the table. I am tired. Rachel, wait. She stopped at the foot of the stairs. He did not come closer. That mattered. His voice was rougher when he spoke again. I handled this badly. Yes. I need to think. So do I. She climbed the stairs. Her bedroom door closed softly. Benjamin remained in the main room. For several minutes, he did not move. Then he looked at the folded apron beside his plate. The next morning, Rachel came downstairs before sunrise. Benjamin was already gone. There was coffee in the pot. One mug sat beside it. Only one. Rachel stared at it. Then she took another from the shelf for herself. At 6, George came in. He stopped when he saw Rachel eating alone at the small kitchen table. Breakfast? Beans are in the bunkhouse. George looked toward the long table. Empty. All right. He left. By supper, the men understood something had happened. Nobody asked. Rachel cooked potatoes and one egg for herself. In the bunkhouse, Charlie burned a pan of beans. Daniel complained. George told both of them to shut up and eat. Benjamin returned after dark. Snow clung to his coat. Rachel was sitting in the front room mending a torn hem. He stopped when he saw her. She looked up. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Benjamin crossed to the kitchen. He made his own coffee. He opened the bread tin. Empty. Rachel heard every sound. The scrape of the knife, the cupboard door, the quiet curse when he found no supper waiting. Once she might have risen automatically. She didn't. Benjamin came back carrying only coffee. He sat at the far end of the long table, the chair where he had once eaten alone before Rachel arrived. She kept sewing. He kept drinking. The house settled around them. No laughter came from the table. No cups passed from hand to hand. No one argued over cornbread. Black Ridge had not changed back in a single night. But for the first time since Rachel's first supper, the ranch remembered exactly what it had felt like before she came. And Benjamin Cole, staring at the empty chair beside him, began to understand that doubt could take warmth out of a house faster than winter ever could. The snow deepened overnight. By morning, the road toward Silver Creek had disappeared beneath wind-blown drifts, and George came in before breakfast with ice on his mustache and a look that settled the matter before anyone asked. "Pass is closed." Rachel stood beside the stove with one hand around a coffee mug. "For how long?" George glanced toward the window. "Day or two if the wind quits. Longer if it doesn't." Rachel nodded. That was all. Her trunk was already half-packed upstairs. Benjamin knew because he had seen her carrying folded dresses up the stairs the evening before. He had said nothing. Now the storm had done what neither of them had been willing to do. It had forced them to remain under the same roof. The days that followed were quiet in an ugly way. Rachel cooked for herself in the small kitchen. Simple things. Oatmeal, potatoes, a little bacon. She washed one plate and one cup. The men returned to the bunkhouse stove, where Charlie discovered that enthusiasm did not improve his cooking. On the second night, smoke rolled from the bunkhouse chimney long before supper. A few minutes later, the door opened and Charlie emerged carrying a skillet at arm's length. George followed him. "What did you do?" "I followed Daniel's directions," Daniel shouted from inside. "I said low." "Fire!" "It was low." "The bottom's black." "That's the skillet." "Not anymore." Rachel heard the exchange from the house. Her mouth twitched. Then she looked toward the long dining table. 9 empty chairs. One of them had been Charlie's. The smile disappeared. Benjamin spent more time outside than the weather required. He checked cattle twice a day, inspected the barn roof, helped Daniel break ice from the water trough, fixed a latch that had not needed fixing. When he came inside, his coat smelled of snow and horse. He rarely looked toward Rachel unless she spoke first. She rarely did. On the third evening, Benjamin sat alone at the long table with a plate of beans George had carried over from the bunkhouse. He ate 2 bites, stopped. The beans were cold. He didn't care. George came through the kitchen door carrying a lantern. "Need you to look at the feed count." Benjamin nodded. George set a folded sheet beside him, then noticed the untouched plate. "You eating?" "Eventually." George pulled out the chair opposite. He sat without invitation. Benjamin looked up. "What?" George rested both hands on his knees. "I've worked this place 23 years, I know. Worked for your father before you. I know that too." George nodded toward the empty room. "Never seen you this stupid." Benjamin stared at him. George didn't flinch. "Careful, I am." "No, you're not." The wind rattled the window panes. George leaned back. "You can lose cattle to weather, lose money to bad markets, lose fence to spring runoff. Happens." Benjamin's jaw tightened. "But losing a good woman because you listened to town gossip?" George shook his head. "That's plain stupidity." Benjamin looked toward the stairs. Rachel's door was closed. "You don't know what was said." "I know what I've seen." George's voice stayed low. "She came here not knowing one man on this spread. First night she fed every one of us from scraps. Found your missing supplies. Found those notes. Sat at this table listening to men nobody else bothers listening to. He paused. And you reckon that's a woman scheming to take something? Benjamin's eyes dropped. I said, I didn't know. That's worse. Benjamin looked up sharply. George held his gaze. Because you do know. The words stayed in the room. George stood. Feed counts there. He picked up his lantern. At the door, he stopped. Your father used to say a man ought to know the difference between caution and cowardice. Benjamin's face hardened. George opened the door. Night, boss. Then he left. Benjamin remained at the table. The beans went colder. Upstairs, Rachel sat on the edge of her bed folding the last of her stockings. She heard none of it. The storm eased the next morning, not enough to open the pass, but enough that the sky turned pale behind the clouds. Rachel carried another armful of clothes to her trunk. She had decided that when the road cleared, she would go to Silver Creek first. After that, she did not know. The lack of a plan frightened her less than it once would have. She had left places before. She could do it again. Downstairs, Charlie came through the front room carrying a basket of split wood. He stopped when he saw something on the floor near the stairs. A folded envelope. Old paper. Creased from being carried. He picked it up. Mrs. Cole? No answer. He turned it over. Rachel Bennett. The writing was neat. Below that, an address in Iowa. Charlie looked toward Benjamin's office. Boss? Benjamin emerged. What? Charlie held out the envelope. Found this by the stairs. Might have fallen from Mrs. Cole's things. Benjamin took it. The letter had already been opened. He started toward the stairs, then stopped. A line visible through the folded page caught his eye. Position available. Benjamin froze. He should not read it. He knew that. It belonged to Rachel. He folded it closed, then unfolded it again. Charlie shifted. Something wrong? Benjamin did not answer. The letter was dated 4 months earlier. Before Silver Creek. Before Black Ridge, before him. Miss Bennett, the position managing the dining room and kitchen at the Helena House remains available should you wish to accept it. Wages will be $28 per month with a private room upstairs and board included. You would oversee ordering, staff schedules, accounts, and meal service. Benjamin read the next lines twice. We understand your aunt may prefer you remain closer to home, but your experience is exactly what we require. If you choose to come west, employment will be waiting. He lowered the page. Charlie peered at him. What is it? Benjamin's throat felt tight. A job offer. For Mrs. Cole? Before she married me, Charlie frowned. Good job? Benjamin gave a short breath. Better than this. Charlie looked around the plain room. Well. Benjamin glanced at him. Charlie lifted both hands. I didn't mean no. You're right. The boy's face turned serious. Then she didn't have to come here. Benjamin looked back at the letter. No. She had not. Rachel could have gone to Helena, earned her own wages, had her own room, no husband, no ranch debt, no winter cattle, no Thomas Hale. No need to convince anyone that she had not come west chasing property. She had chosen Black Ridge, chosen the letters, chosen him. And when the first ugly rumor reached his ears, he had made her stand in the kitchen and answer for that choice. Benjamin closed his eyes. Charlie spoke quietly. Boss. Benjamin folded the letter carefully. Where did you find this? By the stairs. Benjamin nodded. Don't mention it. Charlie hesitated. Yes, sir. He left. Benjamin stood alone. Then the sound of hooves came hard through the yard. Fast. Too fast for weather like this. George shouted outside. A horse stopped near the porch. Benjamin was at the door before the rider dismounted. The man wore a county coat under a heavy buffalo jacket, and his horse was breathing hard enough for steam to rise around its head. Benjamin Cole? Yes. The rider pulled a leather document case from beneath his coat. Got papers for you. Benjamin took them. A county seal showed beneath the string. Rachel had come down the stairs. She stopped 3 steps from the bottom. Benjamin looked back at her. For 1 second, he forgot the rider, forgot the document, forgot everything except the folded letter still in his hand. Rachel saw it. Her face changed. Where did you get that? Benjamin looked down. It fell from your trunk. You read it. It was not a question. He could have lied. He didn't. Yes. Rachel descended the remaining steps. Her expression closed. That was mine. I know. Then you shouldn't have. I know. The rider shifted awkwardly near the door. Benjamin held the letter out. Rachel took it. Their fingers did not touch. She looked at him. Now you know, yes. That I had somewhere else to go, yes. That I didn't need this ranch. His voice lowered. I know. Rachel folded the letter once more. Good. She turned away. Benjamin wanted to stop her. Apologize. Say everything at once. The county rider cleared his throat. Mr. Cole. Benjamin looked down at the sealed papers in his other hand. The rider's face had gone serious. You'd better read that. Benjamin broke the string. His eyes moved across the first page. Payment demand. Transfer of debt. Holder of notes. Thomas Hale. Rachel watched his face tighten. What is it? Benjamin read the final line, then looked at her. Hale bought the notes. Rachel went still. How many? Enough. The word carried a different meaning now. Enough to threaten the ranch. Enough to force action. Enough to turn their private hurt into something they would have to face together, whether either of them was ready or not. Outside, the last flakes of the storm drifted across Black Ridge. Inside, Rachel held the proof that she had once chosen Benjamin freely. Benjamin held the proof that Thomas Hale had finally stopped hiding, and between them stood an empty table, a broken trust, and no time left to pretend either problem could wait. The county rider stayed only long enough to warm his hands. George poured him coffee in the kitchen, while Benjamin carried the papers to the long table and spread them beneath the lamp. Rachel stood across from him. For several minutes, neither spoke. The first page was simple enough. Thomas Hale had acquired several outstanding notes connected to Black Ridge Ranch. Payment would be demanded after the winter cattle sale. If Benjamin could not satisfy the debt, Hale could seek repayment through property. Rachel read the date twice. How long until the cattle sale? 3 weeks. If the pass stays open. Benjamin looked toward the dark window. And if it doesn't? We miss market. Rachel set the page down. Then he isn't waiting for you to fail. Benjamin's mouth tightened. He's waiting for weather to help him. The county rider glanced toward them from the stove, decided the conversation was none of his business, and returned to his coffee. Rachel pulled the second document closer. The numbers were worse than she expected. Not impossible, but close. One note had grown by several $100s from the amount Benjamin remembered. Another carried an added fee for delayed payment. A third had been transferred twice before ending in Thomas Hale's hands. Rachel looked up. "Do you have the originals?" Some. My father handled most of the old borrowing." Benjamin moved toward his office. "I have whatever he left." He returned with a tin document box worn pale around the corners. Rachel sat. Benjamin sat opposite. It felt strange. The same table where they had laughed with the ranch hands was now covered in debt papers. Rachel untied bundles. Benjamin sorted by year, receipts, promissory notes, cattle contracts, tax notices, a mortgage release from 7 years earlier. The room slowly filled with paper. When the rider left, George came in from the yard and quietly shut the door behind him. "Bad?" Benjamin said. "Could be." George pulled off his gloves. "Need me?" "Not yet." George looked toward Rachel. She was holding 2 versions of the same note side by side. "Rachel?" She did not answer. Her finger traced the witness line. One page carried Benjamin's father's signature. The other had the same amount altered in a darker hand. Then she saw the name beneath it. Walter Briggs. Rachel sat straighter. Benjamin noticed. "What?" She tapped the witness mark. "This man. What about him?" "I've seen the name." Benjamin leaned closer. Rachel searched her memory. Not from Black Ridge. Not from the pantry receipts, Silver Creek. A stack of freight papers. A narrow office beside Hale Freight and Supply. Then it came back. When we were in town for the church social, I went into the freight office before we left. Benjamin frowned. "You did?" "To ask about the delayed flour delivery." She turned the page toward him. "There was a clerk there arguing with another man about back wages." Benjamin looked at the signature. "Walter Briggs?" "I'm almost sure." Rachel closed her eyes briefly. He had a red scarf, missing front tooth, kept rubbing ink off his thumb. George grunted. "That's Briggs." Rachel looked at him. "You know him?" "Worked for Hale Freight last year. Left before first snow." Rachel looked back at the document. "What month?" George thought. "September, maybe." Benjamin picked up the note. The witness date was November, 2 months later. Silence. Rachel said, "Then he couldn't have witnessed this." Benjamin's face hardened. George stepped closer. "Could be another Briggs." Rachel shook her head. "Same full name?" George read it. "Walter J. Briggs." He whistled softly. "That's him." Benjamin stood. The chair scraped backward. Rachel reached for the paper. "Wait." "I've waited enough." "Benjamin." He stopped. She held his eyes. "What are you going to do, ride to Hale's place? In this weather?" "The road's passable." "That's not what I meant." He knew. Rachel's voice stayed steady. "You go there angry. Thomas denies everything. Maybe he destroys papers. Maybe he warns everyone involved." Benjamin's hands closed once at his sides. He forged a note. "We think he altered a note. He used a witness who wasn't there. Which we still have to prove." George said quietly, "She's right." Benjamin looked at him. George raised both hands. "Don't like saying it when you're built like that, but she is." Rachel almost smiled. Almost. Benjamin looked back at the paper. His anger did not disappear. It settled. That was better. What do you suggest? He asked. Rachel studied the notice again. We find Briggs. George scratched his jaw. He went north, I heard. Worked a freight camp near Deer Hollow. How far? Half day if the road's decent. Benjamin nodded. I'll go tomorrow. Rachel said. If the road opens. He looked at her. You're coming? The question surprised her. Not because she wanted to, because 3 weeks earlier he might have simply told her to remain behind. Rachel looked at the papers. Yes. Then she remembered the packed trunk upstairs, the letter from Helena folded inside her drawer. The wound between them had not vanished simply because Thomas Hale had produced a larger problem. Benjamin seemed to remember too. His voice changed. You don't owe Blackridge this. Rachel lifted her eyes. No. You could still leave when the pass opens. Yes. He waited. Rachel gathered the altered note into a neat stack. I'm helping the ranch. Benjamin's face gave away nothing. She continued. Don't mistake that for forgiving you. His eyes held hers. I won't. The answer came immediately. That mattered. Rachel stood. I want every original note you have beside every copy Hale sent. We mark the differences. Benjamin nodded. I'll get more lamp oil. George moved toward the kitchen. I'll wake Daniel. He'll know if Briggs ever mentioned Deer Hollow. Rachel looked at George. Don't tell the others why. Wasn't planning to. He left. Benjamin remained by the table. Rachel began arranging the papers. After a moment, he said, The letter. Her hands stopped. Benjamin spoke carefully. I should not have read it. No. I knew that before I opened it. Rachel looked at him. Then why did you? His jaw moved. Because I saw the word's position available and thought maybe you were planning to leave before any of this happened. Rachel stared. That's not better, I know. He looked down. I'm not asking you to excuse it. That was the first apology without explanation. Rachel let it sit between them. Then she returned to the papers. Good. Benjamin nodded once. Nothing was repaired, but something had stopped getting worse. They worked until nearly midnight. At 11, Rachel found another irregularity. A late fee had been added to a note 3 months before the payment was due. Benjamin checked the original. Not there. Another document carried a different ink in the amount line. A third had a witness stamp slightly crooked. Pattern. Not proof of everything. But enough to know Thomas had not merely purchased debt. He had been improving it, making Blackridge appear weaker with every page. Rachel leaned back. He isn't squeezing the ranch. Benjamin looked at her. He's building a story. What story? That Blackridge owes more than it does. That you're behind. That you're desperate. She tapped the altered figures. So when he demands land, it looks reasonable. Benjamin looked toward the window. Snow had begun again. Light flakes, thin, steady. George returned from the bunkhouse. Daniel remembers Briggs saying he took work up near Deer Hollow. Benjamin stood. Good. George hesitated. There's more. Rachel looked up. Storm warning came through from the lower valley. Benjamin's expression changed. When? Ryder passed Morrison's place this afternoon. How bad? Could close the ridge by tomorrow night. Rachel looked at the papers, then at Benjamin. If the storm came early, they might not reach Briggs. They might not reach Market. Thomas knew winter was coming. That was the point. Benjamin moved toward the map on the wall. We leave at first light. Rachel stood. I'll pack. He looked at her. Rachel. What? The road to Deer Hollow isn't good in snow. I didn't marry a mountain rancher because I was afraid of roads. The words came out before she thought about them. Benjamin went still. So did she. For 1 second, the old warmth flickered there. Then Rachel looked away. I'm going upstairs. She climbed the stairs. In her room, the trunk sat open at the foot of the bed, her dresses folded inside, the Helena letter tucked beneath them. Rachel stood over it. Then she closed the lid. Not to leave, not yet. She slid the trunk beneath the bed. Downstairs, Benjamin heard the scrape across the floor above him. He knew the sound. He did not smile, but his shoulders lowered slightly for the first time in days. Rachel came back downstairs, carrying her riding coat. She laid it over the chair. Benjamin looked at the coat, then at her. You're staying. For now. He nodded. She stepped closer to the table and touched the altered note. I'm staying long enough to make sure Thomas Hale doesn't steal a ranch with a fountain pen. That almost smile appeared. Small, tired, real, fair. Rachel gave him a look. Benjamin's smile disappeared, but not completely. Outside, the wind began moving through the pines again. The mountains had started whitening beneath the fresh snow. Their marriage was still bruised. Thomas Hale still held the debt. The roads were closing. But for the first time since Rachel laid her apron beside Benjamin's plate, they were standing on the same side of the table again. And before either of them could understand how much that mattered, Black Ridge would need both of them for something far more immediate than money. The warning came before dawn, not from Silver Creek, from the cattle. Rachel woke to a sound she had never heard at Black Ridge before. Hundreds of animals bawling somewhere beyond the house, low and restless beneath the rising wind. She pulled on her dress and went downstairs. Benjamin was already at the back door. He stood in shirt sleeves, looking toward the north pasture while snow moved sideways across the yard. George came running from the bunkhouse. Upper herd broke east. Benjamin reached for his coat. How many? 40, maybe 50. Wind pushed them toward the high basin. Men with them? George's face tightened. Samuel, Ed, and Will. Rachel came closer. When did they go up? Before dark yesterday, George said. They were supposed to bring the strays down. Benjamin looked toward the mountains. The ridgeline had disappeared. Rachel had seen storms before. This was different. The sky and ground seemed to have joined into one moving wall of white. Can they shelter up there? She asked. Benjamin pulled on his gloves. There's an old line shack below the basin. George shook his head. Roof gave out last spring. Benjamin's hands stopped. Only for a second. Then he said, Saddle 3. George nodded. I'll get Daniel. Rachel stepped between Benjamin and the door. No. He looked down at her. You are not riding into that without food or dry blankets. Rachel, 5 minutes. His jaw tightened. She held his eyes. 5. Benjamin looked at the storm again, then nodded. Rachel moved fast. She wrapped bread in cloth, filled 2 jars with hot broth left from the night before, and packed them into a wooden box with salt pork and dried apples. Charlie appeared in the kitchen, pale beneath his freckles. What's happening? Get every blanket from the upstairs linen chest. Everyone? Everyone. He ran. Rachel filled 2 stoneware bottles with hot water and wrapped them in wool. When Benjamin came back through the kitchen carrying a coil of rope and a lantern, she handed him the food box. He took it. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away immediately. Rachel looked up. Bring them back! Benjamin's face changed. Not much. Enough, I will. She wanted to say more. The wound between them was still there. So was everything left unsaid. There was no room for any of it now. Benjamin turned toward the door. Rachel caught his sleeve. He stopped. Don't promise what the mountain gets to decide. His eyes met hers. Then he nodded once. I'll do everything I can. That's better. He went out. George and Daniel waited on horseback near the gate, coats buttoned to their throats. The three men disappeared into the snow within minutes. Rachel stood on the porch long after she could no longer see them. Then Charlie said behind her, "Mrs. Cole?" She turned. The boy was holding blankets. Rachel took a breath. Bring them inside. The house changed by noon. Rachel moved the long dining table closer to the stove. She cleared every plate, lamp, and decoration from it. Charlie carried in 2 mattresses from upstairs and laid them near the fireplace. Luke and Henry filled buckets at the pump before the handle froze solid. Pete Harris heated stones beside the stove and wrapped them in old towels. Rachel set broth simmering. She boiled water. She laid dry shirts, socks, blankets, and bandages in neat rows. Nobody asked why. They simply worked. At 2 in the afternoon, the storm grew worse. The north windows rattled hard enough that Charlie wedged folded cloth around the frames. Rachel checked the clock. Benjamin had been gone nearly 6 hours. She stirred the broth, checked it again 15 minutes later. Then again. Charlie noticed. He said nothing. At 4, darkness began gathering even though sunset was still an hour away. George's wife had once kept a small medical box in the pantry. Rachel found it beneath a shelf containing old canning jars, liniment, bandages, scissors, a thermometer with a cracked wooden case. She arranged everything on one end of the table. Charlie stood beside her. You think they'll need all that? Rachel looked at the door. I hope not. Another hour passed. Then came shouting. Faint at first. A voice through the wind. Charlie ran outside. Rachel followed to the porch. Lanterns appeared in the storm. One. Then another. Horses emerged from the whiteness, heads down, flanks covered with ice. Benjamin came first. George behind him. Daniel rode alongside a pack horse carrying a man tied into the saddle beneath blankets. 2 more riders followed. Samuel, Will. Rachel counted again. Where's Ed? Benjamin dismounted badly. His right leg nearly buckled. Rachel caught his coat. Benjamin. He's here. George and Daniel were lowering the bundled man. Rachel looked toward Samuel. That's not Ed. Samuel shook his head. Found him near the basin. Who? No idea. Benjamin turned. Inside first. They carried the stranger into the house. His beard was stiff with ice. His face had gone pale beneath the cold. 1 boot was missing. Rachel pointed to the table. Lay him there. The dining table where men once fought over cornbread now held a half-frozen stranger beneath lantern light. Rachel cut the wet outer coat away from him. Charlie, blankets. Charlie brought them. Luke, more hot water. Benjamin stood near the wall, breathing hard. Rachel looked at him. Sit down. I'm fine. Sit. He obeyed. That told her how tired he was. George lowered himself into a chair. Daniel's hands shook as he held a cup. Samuel stood by the stove thawing his gloves. Rachel moved from man to man. Dry blankets, broth, hot stones near their boots. No fuss, no panic. She checked fingers, ears, breathing. When Benjamin tried to stand again, she pressed one hand to his shoulder. Stay. His eyes lifted to hers. Rachel. Stay. He stayed. It was nearly midnight before the stranger began to wake. Rachel was sitting beside him when his eyes opened. Cloudy, unfocused. He tried to move. Easy, she said. He looked around the room, then toward Benjamin. Fear crossed his face. Benjamin leaned forward. Do you know where you are? The man swallowed. Black Ridge? Yes. His eyes closed. George stepped closer, then stopped. Wait. Rachel looked at him. George stared at the stranger's face. Briggs. Benjamin stood. Rachel felt the room change. The man on the table opened his eyes again. Benjamin came closer. Walter Briggs? The stranger looked at him. A long second, then nodded. Rachel's hand went still on the blanket. The freight clerk, the witness name on Thomas Hale's altered note, the man they had planned to ride half a day through snow to find. The mountain had delivered him to their table instead. Benjamin looked at Rachel. Neither spoke. Briggs noticed. His voice came rough. You're Cole? Yes. Briggs's eyes shifted toward the papers stacked on the sideboard. Something like recognition moved across his face. Hale. Benjamin leaned closer. What about Hale? Briggs swallowed. Rachel lifted a cup. Drink first. He took 2 small swallows. His hands shook. Then he looked at Benjamin again. He paid me. The room went silent. For what? Benjamin asked. Briggs looked toward the fire. Blank freight receipts. Rachel's pulse quickened. He had me sign stacks sometimes. Said it saved time when wagons came late. Benjamin's jaw tightened. The debt note. Briggs frowned. What note? Rachel went to the sideboard and brought the copy. She held it where he could see the witness line. Briggs stared. His face changed. I never signed that. Benjamin said nothing. Briggs shook his head harder. I wasn't even working for Hale then. Rachel looked at George. George nodded once. Exactly what they had suspected. Briggs tried to push himself upright. Rachel stopped him. Easy. He pointed weakly toward the document. That isn't mine. Benjamin's voice dropped. Would you say that in front of the county clerk? Briggs looked at him, then toward the storm pounding the windows. After you pulled me out of that basin? His mouth tightened. Yeah. He lay back. I'll say it anywhere. Benjamin looked down at the note. For weeks, Thomas Hale had seemed to hold every advantage. Money, freight, debt, rumor, timing. Now one tired man lying beneath Rachel's blankets had put a crack through the entire scheme. George let out a slow breath. Well. Charlie, standing near the stove, looked from Briggs to Benjamin. Does that mean we beat him? Benjamin looked at Rachel. She was exhausted. Hair loose around her face, sleeves rolled, apron tied back around her waist for the first time since their quarrel, though neither of them had mentioned when she put it on. Benjamin noticed. Rachel saw him notice. No, she said quietly. Charlie frowned. Then what? Rachel looked toward Briggs. Now we can prove he cheated. Benjamin's eyes stayed on her. That's enough. Hours later, when the others were sleeping wherever space allowed, Rachel stood alone at the table gathering empty cups. Benjamin approached. He had changed into dry clothes. His face looked worn. He stopped beside her. You put the apron back on. Rachel looked down. The old cloth was stained with broth. I needed pockets. Benjamin almost smiled. Of course. She picked up another cup. His hand closed gently around it before she could. I've got that. Rachel let him take it. For a moment they stood shoulder to shoulder in the quiet house. Around them slept the men they had nearly lost. On the table rested the paper that might save Black Ridge. Outside, the storm still buried the road. Benjamin looked toward Rachel. I owe you more than an apology. She did not answer. Not yet. But she did not walk away either. And in the first thin hour before dawn, with Black Ridge bruised but standing, Benjamin Cole understood that facing Thomas Hale would be easier than the conversation waiting for him in his own kitchen. The storm weakened just before sunrise, not enough to uncover the road, but enough that the house finally stopped trembling beneath the wind. Men slept wherever they had fallen. George was stretched beneath a blanket near the fireplace. Daniel had one boot off and one still on, his head tipped against the wall. Charlie slept curled in a chair with his arms crossed over his chest. Walter Briggs lay on the mattress nearest the stove, breathing evenly now. Rachel moved quietly among them. She collected cups, folded damp towels, added wood to the fire. When she reached the kitchen, she found the iron stockpot sitting where she had left it. The bottom was coated with dried broth. She filled it with warm water and began scrubbing. It gave her something to do with her hands. The first meal she had cooked at Black Ridge had started in that pot. Beef bones, beans, onions, whatever she could find. She remembered Benjamin standing in the doorway, asking how she planned to feed 10 people with almost nothing. There's enough. She had been so certain then. Funny how much easier food was than people. Footsteps sounded behind her. Rachel did not turn. Benjamin entered carrying something folded over one arm. Her apron. Not the stained one she had worn through the night. The other one. The one she had placed beside his plate when she told him to feed his own ranch. He laid it on the table. Rachel kept scrubbing. I washed that pot already. Benjamin looked into it. Poorly. Apparently. Silence. Rachel rinsed the cloth. Benjamin pulled out a chair but did not sit. I owe you an apology. Rachel's hands slowed. He continued. Not the kind where I explain myself until what I did sounds reasonable. That made her look at him. He was tired enough that his face seemed older. A scrape marked one side of his jaw from the rescue ride. His hair was still damp from melted snow. Rachel set the cloth down. All right. Benjamin rested one hand on the back of the chair. When you came off that stage, I expected a wife who could run a household. Rachel said nothing. I expected decent meals. Order. Someone practical enough to tolerate this place. His mouth tightened. I expected companionship, maybe. The sort a man doesn't have to think too hard about. Rachel's expression did not change. Benjamin glanced toward the sleeping men beyond the kitchen doorway. I expected too little. Something in Rachel's chest shifted. He went on before she could answer. You came here and found things I had stopped seeing. The pantry? Everything. A faint breath left him. You got George laughing at supper again. Got Charlie thinking a kitchen is worth bringing trout to. You made men stay at a table where they used to eat standing up. Rachel looked down at the pot. Benjamin's voice lowered. You made me stop eating alone. That landed harder than the rest. He stepped closer, but not close enough to crowd her. I thought I needed a woman who could keep this house running. Rachel looked up. Benjamin held her eyes. I didn't know I needed the woman who could make me want to come home to it. The kitchen went still. Outside, snow slid from the roof with a soft rush. Rachel gripped the edge of the table. She had imagined words like these before. Not from Benjamin. Years ago. In foolish moments she no longer admitted to having. But imagination was easy. Trust was harder. "If I couldn't cook another meal," she said, "would you still want me here?" Benjamin answered before she finished taking a breath. "Yes." Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly. "If I stopped fixing your accounts, yes. If I didn't notice missing flour? Yes. If I never made another biscuit in my life?" That almost smile came. "I'd mourn the biscuits." Rachel stared at him. Benjamin's smile disappeared. "But yes." She looked away. Her eyes had begun to sting. She hated that. Benjamin did not move closer. He simply waited. Rachel pressed 2 fingers briefly beneath one eye. "I don't want to be useful enough to deserve staying." "I know, no." She turned back to him. "I need you to understand what I'm saying." "I do." "Do you?" His face settled. "I want you when you're angry with me." Rachel went still. "When you disagree with me." He touched the folded apron. "When the biscuits burn." His voice dropped. "When there isn't a plate on this table." Rachel's mouth trembled once. Benjamin did not pretend not to see it. "I want you here because it's you." She looked at him for a long time, then said, "You were a fool, yes. You hurt me. I know. You don't get to decide I'm worth trusting only after someone hands you proof." His eyes lowered. "I know that too." Rachel took one slow breath. "What happens next time somebody tells you something about me?" Benjamin looked up. "I ask you." "And?" "I believe what I know before I believe what I hear." That was better. Rachel stepped closer. Only one step. Benjamin did not touch her. Not yet. She looked at his hands. At the enormous rough fingers that had carried her trunk from the stage, blocked the wind on a mountain road, washed tin plates beside her, and then hesitated when trust mattered most. Rachel reached out, took one of those hands. Benjamin's breath changed. She looked up. "This doesn't make everything disappear." "I know, good." She kept hold of his hand. Benjamin's thumb moved once against her knuckles. Slow, questioning. Rachel did not pull away. He leaned down, stopped, waited. Rachel closed the final inch. Their first real kiss was quiet. No audience, no music. No great declaration afterward. Just warmth, restraint, and the slight tremor in Benjamin's hand when he touched the side of her face. When they separated, Rachel rested her forehead briefly against his chest. His heartbeat was hard beneath his shirt. She almost laughed. "Big Ben Cole is nervous. Don't tell Charlie. I'll consider it." Weeks later, when the roads opened, Walter Briggs rode with Benjamin, George, and the altered papers to the county seat. Rachel went too. She carried the pantry receipts tied in string. Thomas Hale denied everything at first. Then Briggs identified the blank freight slips. Rachel produced the short deliveries. The county clerk compared the altered note against Benjamin's original. The witness date did the rest. There was no gunfight, no public brawl. Thomas lost something more useful than blood. Credit. Neighboring ranchers stopped sending freight through Hale Supply. 2 lenders refused to honor the altered figures. The demand against Black Ridge collapsed back to the legitimate amount Benjamin actually owed. It was still debt. Still work. Still years before everything would be easy. But it was survivable. By spring, the snow had pulled back into the high mountains. Black Ridge turned green along the creek first, then the pasture. The long table stayed crowded. Only now Rachel no longer served everyone while they sat. George cut bread. Daniel poured coffee. Charlie peeled potatoes badly enough that Rachel threatened to take the knife away. Benjamin learned to make stew. The first attempt was burned. The second was thin. The third caused George to stare into his bowl and say, "Well, nobody's dead." Benjamin pointed at him. "That's improvement." Rachel laughed so hard she had to sit down. One Sunday evening, she carried a skillet of cornbread from the kitchen. The conversation around the table kept going. Charlie was accusing Daniel of cheating at horseshoes. George claimed both of them threw like city boys. Walter Briggs, passing through on freight work for another outfit, had stayed for supper and was arguing about cattle prices with Samuel. Rachel approached the table. Without anyone saying a word, George shifted his chair. Charlie pulled in his elbows. Daniel moved the coffee pot. A place opened. For her. Benjamin stood and pulled out the chair beside him. Rachel stopped. Just for a second. She looked at the table, at the men, at Benjamin. The first night she had come here, she had stood over this same table watching other people eat food she had made from scraps. She had thought perhaps that was what belonging meant, being needed, being useful, keeping everyone satisfied enough that nobody asked why she was there. Now no one was waiting for her to prove anything. They were waiting for her to sit down. Rachel placed the skillet in the center. Charlie reached immediately. George slapped his hand. "Let her sit first. There's only 6 pieces. There are 10 people. That's what worries me." Rachel laughed, then sat. Benjamin took his place beside her. Under the table, his enormous hand found hers. He did not squeeze. He simply rested it there. Rachel turned her palm upward and laced her fingers through his. Across from them, Charlie finally got a piece of cornbread and guarded it like gold. Rachel looked around the room. The windows were open to the mild spring evening. Cattle moved somewhere beyond the fence. A hammer sounded once from the barn. Coffee steamed from mismatched mugs. Nobody looked at her as if she had arrived by mistake. Benjamin leaned slightly closer. "Remember your first supper?" Rachel looked at him. "You expected very little." His mouth curved. "I was an idiot." "You improved." "Fair." She smiled. And this time, when the table erupted over who had taken the last piece of cornbread, Rachel stayed exactly where she was. Seated. Wanted. Home. Rachel sat at that long table with Benjamin's hand wrapped gently around hers, listening to grown cowboys argue over the last piece of cornbread, and understood something she had spent years getting wrong. A person could work until their hands ached and still never earn love from someone determined not to give it. And sometimes the hardest thing wasn't proving your worth. It was believing you had worth before anyone else proved they could see it. Imagine yourself in Rachel's place. Imagine traveling hundreds of miles toward a stranger, carrying every old rejection with you, expecting that sooner or later he would look at you the same way everyone else had. Then imagine discovering that love could survive disappointment, mistakes, anger, and forgiveness. Not because 2 people were perfect, but because they finally learned to tell each other the truth and stay long enough to hear the answer. Benjamin nearly lost Rachel because fear made him doubt what his own heart already knew. Rachel nearly left because she had spent too many years believing usefulness was the price of belonging. Their second chance began when neither of them pretended the hurt had never happened. Maybe that is what home really is. Not a place where you are never wounded, but a place where love makes room for honesty, repair, and a chair that remains yours. If Rachel's journey reminded you of something in your own life, tell me in the comments. And if you'd like to stay for more stories of love, mystery, resilience, and healing, subscribe and join us for the ones still waiting down the trail.